Most people think SpongeBob SquarePants is just a silly cartoon about a sponge who flips patties and giggles at nothing. A show made to fill 20 minutes and sell some toys. Nothing more going on underneath it. A marine biologist, a mycologist, and an NOAA research ship all disagree. This is why we've been looking at Bikini Bottom all wrong. The marine biologist who built Bikini Bottom from his own classroom. Before there was a pineapple under the sea, there was a quiet stretch of California coastline, tide pools filling and draining with the pull of the moon, and a young man crouched at the edge of the water, looking at creatures most people would walk right past without a second glance. That man was Steven Hillenburg, and long before the world knew him as the creator of SpongeBob SquarePants, he was something else entirely. He was a marine biology teacher, not a hobbyist, not someone who liked documentaries about the ocean. An actual, trained, working marine science educator who spent his days teaching children about tide pools, sea creatures, and the delicate balance of ocean life. This single fact changes almost everything about how the show should be understood. SpongeBob SquarePants did not come from a writer who thought oceans looked cool on screen. It came from someone who had spent years standing in the actual water, hands cold, watching real crabs scuttle sideways across real rocks, watching real starfish grip onto real stone, watching real sponges sit still while the tide moved around them. Let the weight of that settle for a moment. The show many people think of as pure silliness was built by a man whose first job, whose real job, was making sure children understood how ocean ecosystems worked. Stephen McDaniel Hillenburg was born on August 21, 1961, at Fort Sill, an army post located in Lawton, Oklahoma. He did not stay in Oklahoma for long. He was raised in Anaheim, California, a place that put him much closer to the ocean than the plains of Oklahoma ever could. Growing up near the California coast meant growing up with the ocean nearby, not as a vacation destination, but as something present in daily life. The beach was not a special occasion. It was a place he could return to again and again. As a child, Hillenburg became fascinated with the sea. This was not a passing phase that faded once he got older. It was an interest that shaped the direction of his entire life. Alongside this fascination with the ocean, he also developed a love for art. Two separate interests, pulling him in two different directions, both of which felt important to him at the same time. Most people are asked at some point in their life to choose between something practical and something creative. Hillenburg spent years trying not to choose, and eventually, without fully realizing it, he found a way to combine both. Part of what deepened his love for the sea came from watching the work of Jacques Cousteau, the French explorer and ocean researcher whose documentaries introduced millions of people to the mysteries of underwater life. For a young boy growing up in California, watching Cousteau explore reefs and dive into unknown waters must have felt like watching someone explore an entirely different planet. Except this planet was reachable. It was just past the shore. At 15 years old, Hillenburg had his first real hands-on experience with that other world. He took part in a diving program at Woods Cove in Laguna Beach through a regional education program connected to his high school. This was not a casual trip. It was structured, guided, and educational, meant to introduce students to actual ocean environments rather than simply showing them pictures in a textbook. For Hillenburg, this experience did something that no film or photograph could do. It placed him directly inside the world he had been curious about since childhood. He would later describe this moment plainly. He said the switch clicked, and he decided he wanted to be a marine biologist. But he also still loved being an artist. This is important because it shows that even at the exact moment he chose a scientific path, the artistic part of him did not disappear. It stayed right beside the decision, waiting. Some of his teachers noticed both sides of him too. Knowing he loved art and knowing he loved the ocean, a few suggested a kind of compromise. They told him he should just draw fish. On the surface, this sounds like a reasonable middle ground. Combine the two passions. Draw the animals he loved so much. But Hillenburg did not feel inspired by that idea. He found the thought of simply drawing fish over and over kind of boring. He wanted more than illustration. He wanted to build things, to imagine entire situations and entire characters, not just capture a single image of a single animal. This small moment, a teenager quietly deciding that a suggested path was not enough for him, ended up being an early sign of what he would eventually create. He was not interested in drawing the ocean. He was interested in building a world inside it. During a few summers after finishing high school, Hillenburg took a job that seems almost too fitting in hindsight. He worked as a fry cook and lobster boiler at a fast food seafood restaurant in Maine. Picture a teenage boy standing over hot oil, flipping food quickly, working in the kind of loud, busy, physically demanding job that fast food kitchens often are. At the time, this was probably just a summer job, a way to earn some money before heading back to school. It likely did not feel like anything more than that in the moment. Years later, this same experience would directly shape one of the most famous jobs in cartoon history. SpongeBob SquarePants works as a fry cook at a restaurant called the Krusty Krab, flipping patties with cheerful, tireless energy. That detail did not come from nowhere. It came from Hillenburg's own summers spent doing almost the exact same kind of work, standing over hot grills, moving fast, keeping up with the demands of a busy kitchen. The character's job is not just comedic invention. It is a direct piece of the creator's own life, placed underwater and given a permanently good mood. After high school, Hillenburg continued down the academic path toward marine science. In 1984, he graduated from Humboldt State University in California with a degree in natural resource planning and interpretation, with a specific focus on marine resources. This is not a casual degree. It required real coursework in ocean science, ecosystems, and the kind of academic training that would allow someone to actually teach and work professionally in the field of marine biology. With that degree finished, Hillenburg moved into the next major chapter of his life. He became a marine biology teacher at the Orange County Marine Institute, a place now known as the Ocean Institute, located in Dana Point, California. He worked there for 3 years, teaching real students about real ocean science. This was full-time work, not a side project. He stood in front of classrooms, or, more likely, stood at the edge of tide pools with groups of children, teaching them directly from the environment itself. What exactly did he teach? According to his own description, the lessons covered tide pool ecology, nautical history, diversity, and adaptation. Each of these subjects deserves a moment of attention because they tell us a great deal about the foundation underneath SpongeBob SquarePants. Tide pool ecology means studying the small pools of water that form along rocky shorelines when the tide goes out, leaving behind pockets filled with tiny ecosystems. Crabs, snails, sea stars, anemones, and small fish often get trapped in these pools until the water returns. For a marine biology teacher, tide pools are one of the best possible classrooms because they let students see, up close and without needing a boat or scuba gear, real ocean creatures behaving naturally in a contained space. Nautical history involves the human side of the ocean, the ships, the exploration, the long relationship between people and the sea. Diversity, in this context, refers to the incredible range of different species living in ocean environments, and how many different shapes, sizes, and survival strategies exist just below the surface of the water. Adaptation refers to how those species change and adjust over time in order to survive in their specific environments. Now hold all 4 of those subjects in your mind at once. Tide pools, ocean history, the diversity of sea creatures, the way animals adapt to survive. Every single one of these ideas shows up directly and clearly in the world of Bikini Bottom. Hillenburg himself explained what teaching at this institute revealed to him. He said that working there, he saw how amazed children were by undersea life, especially by the small creatures found in tide pools. Read that sentence again slowly. He was not simply teaching a curriculum. He was watching, in real time, how deeply children connected with these small, strange, wonderful animals living in shallow pools of seawater. He was seeing, years before SpongeBob ever existed, exactly how powerful this kind of subject matter could be for young audiences. This detail is easy to miss, but it matters enormously. The success of SpongeBob SquarePants with children is often treated as something that just happened, a lucky formula that worked. But Hillenburg had already tested a version of this formula years earlier, using real tide pool creatures and real classrooms full of real kids. He already knew, from direct experience, that children were captivated by this kind of material. material. He was not guessing when he built Bikini Bottom. He was applying something he had already witnessed firsthand. While working at the marina, one of the education directors at the institute asked Hillenburg if he would be interested in creating an educational comic book about the animal life found in tidal pools. This request led to the creation of something that would later become the true starting point of SpongeBob SquarePants. Hillenburg created a comic called The Intertidal Zone. This was not meant for entertainment or publication in the traditional sense. It was a teaching tool, something he used directly with his students to help explain tide pool ecosystems in a way that felt more engaging than a standard textbook. Inside this comic were anthropomorphic versions of real sea creatures, meaning animals drawn with human-like personalities and behaviors, while still representing actual species found in tide pools. Among these characters were two co-hosts who guided the reader through the material, Bob the Sponge and Rocky the Shrimp. Bob the Sponge, in this early version, actually looked closer to a real sea sponge, rather than the stylized square shape that SpongeBob would later become known for. This is an important detail. The very first version of this character was drawn to resemble the true shape of a natural sea sponge, not the cartoon block shape most people recognize today. The comedic square shape came later, as a separate creative choice, once Hillenburg was thinking less like a science teacher and more like a cartoonist looking for something funny. The Intertidal Zone was never successfully published as an actual comic book series for the public. It stayed within the walls of his classroom, used purely as an educational resource. But its failure to become a published series did not mean it failed as an idea. In fact, this quiet classroom project ended up becoming one of the most important building blocks in cartoon history, even though almost none of Hillenburg's students at the time could have possibly known that. Working on the Intertidal Zone also had an effect on Hillenburg personally. It confirmed something he may have already been sensing, that his interest in art and storytelling was pulling at him just as strongly, if not more strongly, than his interest in marine science. Even though it was a great experience for him, he realized he was more interested in art than in the profession he had originally trained for. This realization did not come with resentment toward marine biology. He was not walking away from something he disliked. He had simply discovered, through the process of making this comic, where his deeper passion actually lived. It is one thing to enjoy teaching. It is another thing entirely to feel pulled, again and again, toward creating characters and stories. Hillenburg was feeling that second pull get stronger and stronger, and he eventually chose to follow it. In 1989, Hillenburg made the decision to enroll at the California Institute of the Arts, often known simply as CalArts, located in Santa Clarita, California. This is one of the most respected schools in the country for animation, and choosing to study there was a serious, focused step toward a career change. He was not dabbling in animation as a hobby anymore. He was formally training for it, the same way he had once formally trained for marine science. At CalArts, Hillenburg pursued a degree in experimental animation, a program focused not just on traditional cartoon techniques, but on creative, often unconventional approaches to animated storytelling. He earned his Master of Fine Arts degree in 1992. This means that by his early 30s, Hillenburg held two completely different academic credentials, one in marine science, earned through years of fieldwork and teaching, and one in animation, earned through years of art and storytelling. While at CalArts, he created two short animated films that would end up playing an important role in launching his professional career. One was called Wormholes, and the other was called The Green Beret. Wormholes won an award for Best Animated Concept at a film festival, a meaningful achievement for a student filmmaker still building a professional reputation. The Green Beret told the story of a Girl Scout struggling to sell cookies because of unusually large hands, a strange and specific kind of humor that hints at the offbeat comedic instincts Hillenburg would later bring to Bikini Bottom. These short films did more than earn recognition. They helped Hillenburg land his first real job inside the animation industry. He was hired to work on Rocko's Modern Life, an animated series airing on Nickelodeon, the same network that would later air SpongeBob SquarePants. Hillenburg worked on Rocko's Modern Life from 1993 to 1996, taking on multiple roles roles during his time there, including director and writer. This job mattered for more than just the paycheck it provided. It gave Hillenburg practical experience in exactly the kind of work he would need in order to create his own show one day. He later explained that working on Rocko's Modern Life taught him a great deal about writing and producing animation specifically for television, a very different challenge than making short student films. Television animation involves deadlines, structure, ongoing characters, episode formats, and a level of consistency that short films simply do not require. Hillenburg was, in a very real sense, serving an apprenticeship, learning the practical skills of running an animated show before he ever got the chance to run his own. During his time on Rocko's Modern Life, he was eventually promoted to creative director for the show's fourth and final season, helping oversee both pre-production and post-production work. This meant he was not just contributing individual episodes anymore. He was helping guide larger creative decisions across the entire production. Working on this series also allowed him to repay loans he had taken out for his education. A small but meaningful detail that reminds us this was, first and foremost, a real job with real financial stakes, not simply a creative playground. One particular episode from Rocko's Modern Life deserves special attention. In the third season, an episode titled Fishin' Chumps was co-written and directed by Hillenburg. The plot followed characters going on a fishing trip, completely unaware that a pair of human-like sea creatures were attempting to catch them from underwater. If that setup sounds familiar, it should. This episode essentially flipped the usual predator and prey relationship between humans and sea creatures, giving personality and agency to the underwater characters instead of the humans. Looking back, this episode functions almost like an early rehearsal for the world Hillenburg would soon create, one where sea creatures are the main characters, full of thought, emotion, and humor, rather than simple animals in the background of a human story. Some evidence even suggests that the earliest seed of the SpongeBob concept dates back even further than most people realize, possibly as far back as 1986, during Hillenburg's original years teaching at the Orange County Marine Institute. If true, this means the idea for SpongeBob SquarePants was not something that suddenly appeared once Hillenburg entered the animation industry. It may have been quietly forming in his mind for years, slowly evolving from classroom material into something with real narrative and comedic potential, long before Nickelodeon ever got involved. By 1996, during his final stretch working in television animation, Hillenburg began actively developing the character who would eventually become SpongeBob. This character had already existed in early form back in the intertidal zone, but now, years later, with animation training and television experience behind him, Hillenburg was ready to reshape that early Sponge character into something built specifically for a full television series. The original name for this character was not SpongeBob, it was SpongeBoy. This name change did not happen for creative reasons. It happened because of a legal conflict. A mop company already held rights to the name SpongeBoy, which meant Hillenburg could not use it without running into copyright issues. Rather than abandon the character entirely, he made a small but important adjustment, changing the name from SpongeBoy to SpongeBob. Even with this forced change, Hillenburg made a deliberate choice to keep the word sponge somewhere in the character's name. This was intentional. He reportedly did not want children watching the show to become confused about what kind of creature the character actually was. Without the word sponge clearly present in the name, there was a real concern that young viewers might mistake the character for something else entirely, possibly even a block of cheese, given his yellow color and block-like shape. This small naming decision reveals just how seriously Hillenburg thought about clarity and communication, even in something as simple as choosing a character's name. Once the character had his new name, Hillenburg continued shaping the overall look and personality of SpongeBob. Interestingly, some of his design choices were pulled directly from Hillenburg's own life experiences, not just his professional knowledge of marine biology. SpongeBob's appearance, including his noticeably gapped teeth, was influenced by how Hillenburg himself looked as a young child. Other characters in the show were also built using pieces of Hillenburg's real life. Mr. Krabs, the money-focused owner of the Krusty Krab, was based on a former manager Hillenburg once once worked under at a sea-themed restaurant. Pearl, Mr. Krabs' daughter, was inspired by Hillenburg's own experience supervising whale-watching trips during his years as a marine science educator. These details show that Bikini Bottom was never built purely from imagination. It was constructed using real people, real jobs, and real moments Hillenburg had personally lived through, simply reshaped into an underwater cartoon setting. By 1999, all of these pieces, the marine science background, the animation training, the television experience, the personal life details folded into character design, finally came together into a finished television series. SpongeBob SquarePants premiered on Nickelodeon that year, introducing audiences to Bikini Bottom, its unusual cast of characters, and a tone that felt unlike almost anything else on children's television at the time. Years later, ahead of a documentary about the show's cultural impact, Hillenburg spoke with a reporter about what he hoped audiences, especially young audiences, would take away from watching it. He explained that the show came from something precious, something that people needed to appreciate. He said that hopefully, if someone watches SpongeBob, they see the plankton, the crabs, and the starfish, and they end up wanting to take care of the oceans. This statement, coming directly from the creator himself, confirms something that casual viewers rarely stop to consider. SpongeBob SquarePants was never simply a random comedy about a talking sponge. It was built from its very first sketch inside a teaching comic as a way to help people, especially children, feel connected to ocean life. The jokes, the silliness, the wild adventures through Bikini Bottom, all of it sits on top of a much steeper and more sincere foundation. One shaped by years spent standing in tide pools, watching real children fall in love with real sea creatures. Understanding this changes the way the entire show can be viewed. Every crab, every jellyfish, every strange creature wandering through the background of Bikini Bottom traces back to a man who once spent his career teaching people to notice and care about exactly those kinds of animals. The show did not start as entertainment first and education second. If anything, it started the other way around, built by someone whose first instinct was always to teach, and whose second instinct, just as strong, was to make people laugh while he did it. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. There is one more piece of this early history that changes how the entire show should be understood, something that goes far beyond Hillenburg's personal biography. It has to do with the very name of the underwater town where all of this takes place, and where that name actually comes from. Section 2. Bikini Bottom isn't a theory, it's a confirmed location. For years, one of the most repeated claims about SpongeBob SquarePants was treated as nothing more than a fun rumor passed around online. The idea was simple. Bikini Bottom, the underwater town where SpongeBob lives, is not a made-up name pulled from nowhere. It sits directly beneath a real place on planet Earth, a real chain of islands with a real name, and a history that most people watching the show as children never learned about. For a long time, this idea got treated the same way people treat any other fan theory. Something fun to mention, something to bring up in conversation, but not something anyone expected to actually be true. The kind of claim that gets shared because it sounds clever, not because anyone checked whether it held up. It holds up. This is not a theory anymore. It is a confirmed fact, stated plainly in serious historical sources about the real island chain the show is named after. Bikini Bottom is named after and is described as sitting underneath a real place called Bikini Atoll. Before going any further, it helps to understand exactly what an atoll actually is, since the word itself is not something most people use in daily conversation. An atoll is a ring-shaped island or group of islands formed from coral that surrounds a central lagoon of calm water. Atolls usually form around what used to be a volcano, long after the volcano itself has worn down or sunk beneath the surface, leaving behind a circular reef structure with land poking up around the edges. Bikini Atoll is exactly this kind of formation, a ring of small islands surrounding a central body of water, sitting out in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. Bikini Atoll is part of a much larger group of islands called the Marshall Islands. The Marshall Islands are spread out across a massive stretch of ocean, covering roughly 1 million square miles of water, positioned north of the equator, sitting roughly halfway between Hawaii and Papua New Guinea. This is not a small or easily reached location. It sits far out in open ocean, isolated from major population centers, surrounded on all sides by miles and miles of deep blue water. The name Bikini itself comes from an English spelling of the original name for these islands, which in the local language was closer to Pikini. Over time, through colonization and outside influence, the anglicized version, Bikini, became the name most commonly used and recognized around the world. Understanding where Bikini Atoll physically sits on the map matters, because it means the show is not simply borrowing a word that sounds funny or exotic. It is placing its fictional town in a specific, real location, one that can be pointed to on an actual map of the Pacific Ocean. Bikini Bottom is not floating somewhere vague and undefined beneath the ocean in general. According to information tied directly to the atoll itself, it sits underneath this exact place. This detail alone is worth sitting with for a moment. Millions of children grew up singing along to the show's opening song, laughing at SpongeBob and his friends, without ever knowing that the town's name was not simply invented for its playful sound. It was chosen because it connects the fictional world directly to a real one, a real ring of islands sitting quietly in the middle of the Pacific. Now here's where the story becomes even more interesting, because the confirmation of this connection did not come only from historical writing about the atoll. It came from the people who actually worked on the show, the very people who gave voice to its most famous characters. In 2015, Tom Kenny, the voice actor who has played SpongeBob himself since the very beginning of the series, was directly asked about this theory during an interview. Fans had been speculating for years that Bikini Bottom's connection to Bikini Atoll meant something deeper, something related to the nuclear history of the real location. Kenny addressed the question directly, rather than avoiding it. He explained that Bikini Bottom is, in fact, named after Bikini Atoll, the real place where nuclear testing happened decades earlier. He confirmed this part of the theory clearly and without hesitation. However, when it came to the deeper version of the theory, the idea that SpongeBob and his friends are somehow the result of mutations caused by that nuclear testing, Kenny pushed back. He stated plainly that he does not think SpongeBob and his friends are mutations. In his view, the naming connection is real, but the mutation theory built on top of it goes further than what the show itself actually supports. This is an important distinction to hold on to. Kenny was not denying the connection to the real island. He was confirming it directly, using his own words, as someone who has spent decades working closely on the show. What he pushed back on was a specific extended theory, the idea that the characters themselves are radioactive mutants. Two separate claims exist here. One claim, the naming and location connection, was confirmed. The other claim, the mutation origin story, was rejected by Kenny personally. Interestingly, not everyone connected to the show agrees with Kenny's take on the second part. In 2024, Roger Bumpus, the voice actor behind Squidward, also weighed in on the theory. Bumpus shared that he, like Kenny, believes the mutation theory is not true. But then there is a third voice in this conversation, and this one complicates things in a way that makes the whole topic far more interesting than a simple yes or no answer. Mr. Lawrence, the voice actor who plays Plankton, has spoken about this same theory, and his answer is very different from Kenny's and Bumpus's. Lawrence has stated that he believes the theory is absolutely true. He went further than simply agreeing with the basic idea. He described how, early in the show's development, during the first season, the creative team was actively discussing exactly this kind of concept. According to Lawrence, there were direct conversations behind the scenes about how far they were willing to take the apocalyptic idea behind the show. He recalled discussions framed around the possibility that the entire world above the ocean's surface had been destroyed, and that Bikini Bottom was essentially all that remained, a small, strange pocket of life continuing on after everything else had ended. Take a moment to consider what this means. Three people who worked directly on the show, the actor who voices SpongeBob, the actor who voices Squidward, and the actor who voices Plankton, do not fully agree with each other on how deep this connection runs. Kenny and Bumpus see the location naming as real, but stop there. Lawrence remembers actual creative conversations about a much darker, more complete version of the concept, one where the world above the water might not exist anymore at all. This kind of disagreement between people who were all present during the show's early development tells us something valuable. It tells us that even in inside the writing room, opinions about how far to lean into this darker underlying concept were not fully settled. Some team members clearly saw it as a small, clever piece of naming, a wink toward history buried inside a location's title. Others appear to have genuinely explored the idea of building an entire unspoken backstory around it, one involving the destruction of the surface world. Whether or not the show ever officially committed to that darker version does not change the core fact at the center of all of this. Bikini Bottom is named after and situated beneath a real place. That part is not up for debate among any of the three voice actors mentioned. The disagreement is only about how much additional meaning to read into that choice. There is another important detail that strengthens the seriousness of this connection even further. According to reporting on the subject, an earlier version of the show's script specifically referred to the location by name, tying it directly to the bottom of Bikini Atoll, rather than using a more vague or softened phrase. This detail suggests that the connection between the fictional town and the real island was not some accidental byproduct of choosing a catchy-sounding name. It appears to have been a deliberate choice from very early in the show's development, one that got carried forward even as the show's final title used the softer, more playful-sounding version, Bikini Bottom, rather than directly referencing the atoll by its full name in the show's actual title. To really understand why this naming choice carries so much weight, it helps to understand a little about why the word bikini became so widely known across the world in the first place, separate from the cartoon entirely. Most people today associate the word bikini with a style of two-piece swimsuit. Very few people stop to think about where that name actually came from. The connection is not a coincidence, and it is not unrelated to the same island chain the cartoon borrows its town's name from. In the summer of 1946, a new swimsuit design was being introduced by a French designer. Around the exact same time, historic nuclear testing was taking place at Bikini Atoll, drawing massive worldwide attention and media coverage. The designer chose to name his new swimsuit after the atoll itself, deliberately connecting the two events. The idea was that the swimsuit's design felt so bold and attention-grabbing that it deserved a name tied to something equally explosive and widely talked about in the news at that exact moment. This means the word bikini, in the version most people recognize today as referring to a swimsuit, is directly borrowed from the same island chain that inspired the cartoon's town name decades later. Two completely different parts of modern pop culture: a swimsuit style worn by millions of people and a children's cartoon watched by millions more, both trace their names back to the exact same tiny cluster of islands sitting out in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. This is worth pausing on. The word bikini did not start out as a name for clothing. It started out as the name of a real place, home to real people, long before either the swimsuit or the cartoon existed. Both later uses of the word borrowed weight and attention from a historical event that most people wearing the swimsuit and most kids watching the cartoon never learned about. Returning to the show itself, once the naming and location connection is understood clearly, small details throughout SpongeBob SquarePants start to look different than they did before. What once seemed like nothing more than a funny, playful name for an underwater town becomes something with real geographic roots, tied to an actual location that people can find on a map, learn about in history books, and visit today under very specific and controlled circumstances. It is worth noting that Bikini Atoll, in real life, is not simply an abandoned island lost to history. It still exists as a physical place today. It is possible for people to visit the atoll, though only under very particular conditions. Visitors are required to arrive aboard vessels that are fully self-sufficient, meaning the boat itself must be capable of supporting the visit without relying on resources from the island. Visitors must also pay for a diver and 2 representatives from the local government council to accompany them during the trip. These local representatives are required specifically to make sure that visitors do not remove any artifacts from the shipwrecks located within the atoll's lagoon, wrecks that remain there as a direct result of the very same historical events tied to the island's name. This detail matters because it shows that Bikini Atoll is not simply a historical footnote footnote confined to old documents and photographs. It remains an active part of the present-day world, still standing, still capable of being visited, still carrying physical evidence of what happened there decades ago, sitting quietly beneath its waters. Knowing this changes how the cartoon's setting can be viewed. Bikini Bottom is not simply a fictional, cheerful, brightly colored world invented purely for comedy and imagination. It is deliberately built on top of, and named after, a location that still physically exists. A place people can travel to today if they meet the right requirements. A place with real history embedded directly into its geography. This raises an obvious question, one that naturally leads toward exactly what this section has been building toward, without fully explaining yet. If Bikini Bottom sits beneath a real physical place, then what exactly happened at that real place to make it significant enough that a children's cartoon would borrow its name in the first place? Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The answer to that question is far heavier than most viewers of the show ever realized while watching SpongeBob flip patties and chase jellyfish through calm, colorful water. Underneath the playful tone of the cartoon sits a real historical event, one involving real people, real consequences, and effects that are still being felt by real communities today. Section 3. The real history hiding inside the pun. Bikini Atoll sat quietly in the middle of the Pacific Ocean for a very long time before the rest of the world ever learned its name. Before the 1940s, it was simply the home of a small community of people living on a ring of islands surrounding a calm central lagoon. They fished. They raised animals. They lived their lives the way people living on remote Pacific islands had lived for generations, largely unknown to most of the outside world. That quiet existence ended because of a war being fought on the other side of the planet. World War II reshaped huge parts of the Pacific Ocean, including areas that had nothing directly to do with the fighting itself. When the war ended, the United Nations placed a large section of the northern Pacific under the control of the United States, including a group of islands known as the Marshall Islands. Bikini Atoll was part of this group. Almost overnight, a small remote island chain that had spent generations quietly existing on its own became something else entirely in the eyes of a powerful government. It became a tool. The United States needed a place to test something new and terrifying, something that had only recently been used in war for the first time. Nuclear weapons had ended the war in the Pacific only a short time earlier, and now the government wanted to understand more about what these weapons could do, how powerful they could be made, and how they behaved under different conditions. Testing weapons this dangerous required distance. It required isolation. It required a location far enough away from major cities and population centers that the risks involved would not immediately threaten large numbers of people back home. Bikini Atoll fit this need perfectly, at least from the perspective of the people making that decision. It was remote. It was surrounded by open ocean. It was, in the eyes of the US government, an acceptable place to conduct nuclear testing. There was just one problem with this plan. People already lived there. In 1946, the United States government removed the people living on Bikini Atoll. The population at the time was around 167 people. They did not choose to leave. They were relocated, moved away from the only home many of them had ever known, in order to make room for nuclear weapons testing. The islanders were moved to a different island called Rongerik, located east of Bikini. On the surface, this may sound like a simple relocation, a temporary move to another nearby island while testing took place. In reality, it created a genuine humanitarian disaster. Rongerik did not have the resources needed to support the number of people who had just been moved there. The land could not produce enough food. The islanders began experiencing real, serious hunger. People who had been taken from a home capable of sustaining them were placed somewhere that could not. This detail deserves attention because it is often left out of casual conversations about Bikini Atoll. This was not simply a story about scientific testing happening somewhere far away and harmless. Real people were displaced from their homes, and that displacement led directly to actual suffering, hunger, and hardship for a community that had no involvement in the decision being made about their own land. With With testing set to begin, the U.S. military moved forward with what became known as Operation Crossroads, a name given to the very first set of nuclear tests conducted at Bikini Atoll. The very first detonation under this operation used a device given the name Able. This test alone was already a significant historical event, one of the earliest nuclear detonations conducted anywhere in the world after the bombs used at the end of World War II. Only a short time later, a second test was conducted. This one detonated underwater rather than in the air. This particular test became historically significant for a very specific reason. It marked the first time in history that a nuclear weapon had ever been detonated underwater. This test became known as the Baker test. Photographs of the underwater explosion, capturing a massive column of water and debris being thrown high into the sky, became some of the most recognizable and disturbing images to come out of the entire testing program. Testing at Bikini Atoll did not stop after these two early detonations. Between 1946 and 1958, a period spanning 12 years, a large number of nuclear weapons were detonated at or near this location. Sources differ slightly depending on whether they count only the tests conducted directly at Bikini Atoll or whether they include additional tests conducted at a nearby location called Eniwetok, which the US government used as a second testing site during the same general period. When counting only Bikini Atoll itself, the number of nuclear tests conducted there is recorded as 23. When counting both Bikini and Eniwetok together, the total number of nuclear detonations across both locations climbs much higher, reaching a total of 67 nuclear weapons detonated across the two sites during this period. 12 years of repeated nuclear testing at a single small island chain is difficult to fully picture. Each test released massive amounts of energy, radiation, and force into the surrounding land, water, and air. Each test added to the damage already caused by the tests before it. This was not a single isolated event. It was a sustained, repeated program of nuclear testing, carried out again and again, year after year, at the same general location. Among all of these tests, one in particular stands out as by far the most significant and the most devastating. On March 1st, 1954, the United States detonated a device known as Bravo at Bikini Atoll. This single test produced an explosion with a force equal to roughly 1,000 bombs the size of the one dropped on Hiroshima at the end of World War II. Sit with that number for a moment. 1,000 times the force of a bomb that had already been considered one of the most destructive weapons ever used in human history up to that point. The Bravo test was not simply another data point in a long list of experiments. It was an explosion so massive that it permanently altered the physical landscape of the islands themselves, and it released radioactive fallout across a much wider area than anyone involved had planned for or expected. This fallout did not stay contained to the immediate test site. Radioactive material spread through the air and settled across a wide area, affecting nearby islands and the people living on them, as well as passing ships and their crews that happened to be in the surrounding waters at the time. The Bravo test remains, to this day, remembered as one of the most significant and damaging nuclear tests ever conducted anywhere in the world. The consequences of this test, and of the testing program as a whole, did not end once the explosions themselves stopped. They continued for decades afterward, shaping the lives of the Bikini Islanders in ways that stretched far beyond the years when the actual testing took place. In the 1970s, the United States government made an attempt to allow some of the displaced Bikini Islanders to return home. Close to 200 people were brought back to their original islands during this period, likely under the belief, or at least the hope, that enough time had passed and enough of the immediate danger had faded for people to safely resettle there. That hope did not hold up. In 1978, the United States government removed the islanders a second time. This second removal happened because testing revealed a serious and alarming problem. The people who had returned to Bikini Atoll were found to have absorbed more radioactive cesium into their bodies than any other known human population on record. This detail is worth repeating clearly because of how significant it truly is. Out of every human population ever measured and studied for this specific kind of radioactive exposure, the Bikini Islanders who returned to their home in the 1970s recorded the highest levels ever found. Not simply high levels, the highest levels documented in any known group of people, anywhere in the world. This finding forced the government to remove the islanders yet again, ending their brief return home and confirming that the land, decades after the actual testing had stopped, was still not safe enough for people to live on permanently. To this day, the descendants of the original Bikini Islanders remain unable to return home. The radiation contamination left behind by decades of nuclear testing has not fully disappeared. According to historical sources documenting the site, this contamination will not fully dissipate for thousands of years. This is not a temporary inconvenience measured in a few more decades. It is a permanent, generational displacement, one that has already stretched across multiple generations of the same family lines, with no clear endpoint currently in sight. Families who were removed from their homes in 1946 to make way for nuclear testing never fully got that home back. Their children did not get it back. Their grandchildren have not gotten it back either. An entire community has spent more than 70 years living away from the land their ancestors originally called home, all because that land was chosen decades ago as a convenient and remote location for testing weapons of mass destruction. There is one more detail about the physical islands themselves worth understanding, because it shows just how permanently the landscape itself was reshaped by this testing program. To prepare the area for the larger vessels needed during the testing operations, the United States used explosives to cut an artificial channel through the natural coral reef surrounding the atoll. Large sections of coral were also destroyed using explosives, simply to clear space for the operation. Beyond this initial preparation, the nuclear detonations themselves carved massive craters directly into the ocean floor beneath the atoll. These underwater explosions were powerful enough to physically reshape the seafloor, creating enormous holes that were only partially filled back in over time by debris scattered from the blasts themselves. The explosions also threw enormous amounts of irradiated coral and mud across a wide area, spreading contaminated material far beyond the immediate blast zones and settling it across the surrounding islands and waters. This means the physical geography of Bikini Atoll today is not the same as it was before testing began. The land, the reef, and the ocean floor underneath it were permanently altered by the sheer force of repeated nuclear explosions. Some of these craters remain today, filled with water, and stand as physical, visible evidence of exactly what took place there decades ago. Beyond the physical landscape, the human cost of this history extended into other communities as well. Nuclear testing across the wider Marshall Islands region, including sites beyond Bikini itself, affected other Pacific communities living downwind from the test locations, exposing them to radioactive fallout they had no part in creating and no ability to protect themselves against. This entire history sat largely outside of mainstream public knowledge for decades, tucked away in history books and government records rather than everyday conversation. Then, in a strange and unexpected turn, a small piece of this history found its way back into public awareness through an entirely unrelated source. A children's cartoon about a cheerful sponge who lives in a pineapple and works at a fast food restaurant. Understanding this full history changes the emotional weight behind a simple naming choice made decades after the actual events took place. When the creators of SpongeBob SquarePants named their fictional underwater town Bikini Bottom and placed it directly beneath the real Bikini Atoll, they were not simply choosing a fun, catchy-sounding name pulled at random. Whether every single member of the creative team fully understood the depth of this history at the time or not, the name itself carries all of this weight along with it, whether viewers realize it or not. Millions of children have grown up singing along to the show's opening song, laughing at SpongeBob and his friends, completely unaware that the very name of the town where all of these adventures take place is tied directly to one of the most significant and damaging nuclear testing programs in human history. A real island, a real displaced community, a real explosion 1,000 times more powerful than the bomb dropped on Hiroshima. All of it sitting quietly underneath a cartoon about a sponge who flips patties and blows bubbles with his best friend. This connection also helps explain why the fictional world of Bikini Bottom feels, in certain small and easy-to-miss ways, slightly disconnected from the past passage of normal time. Many of the show's background details, including certain fashion choices and mannerisms among its underwater residents, carry a distinctly old-fashioned feel, closer to the decades surrounding the actual nuclear testing period than to the modern-day setting the show otherwise seems to exist in. Whether this detail was placed intentionally by the show's creators or emerged simply as a byproduct of the era in which the earliest episodes were written, it lines up in a strange and noticeable way with the real historical timeline tied to the atoll above it. There is a reason this connection between real-world nuclear history and a children's cartoon managed to survive largely unnoticed by the audience it was made for. Children watching the show were never meant to pick up on any of this. The show functions perfectly well as a bright, funny, imaginative series without ever requiring viewers to know anything about Bikini Atoll's real history. The comedy works on its own. The characters work on their own. Nothing about the show demands historical knowledge in order to be enjoyed. But knowing this history changes the experience of rewatching the show as an adult. Small details that once seemed like nothing more than harmless background flavor start to carry a different kind of weight once the full history behind the town's name becomes clear. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. This raises a natural next question, one that shifts the focus away from the town itself and toward the creatures who actually live inside it. If the town's name and location carry this much real-world history behind them, it becomes worth asking just how much real science and real biology went into building the actual characters who call this town home. Section 4. Every main character is a scientifically accurate choice. Bikini Bottom is filled with characters who look absurd at first glance. A pink starfish who struggles to think clearly, an octopus with only 6 legs who paints badly and plays clarinet worse, a crab obsessed with money who somehow runs a restaurant, a squirrel wearing a space helmet who lives in a dome full of trees deep underwater. On the surface, these characters look like nothing more than random, silly designs put together purely for laughs. They are not random. Every single one of these characters was built using real traits taken directly from real animals. Steven Hillenburg's years spent working as a marine biology teacher did not just inspire the general idea of an underwater cartoon. It shaped the actual personalities and behaviors of nearly every major character on the show, using real biology as the starting point. Start with Patrick Star, SpongeBob's best friend, and easily one of the most recognizable characters on the entire show. Patrick is a sea star, more commonly known by the less accurate but more familiar name, starfish. Real sea stars belong to a group of animals called echinoderms, a group that also includes sea urchins and sand dollars. This detail alone might not seem important, but it becomes very important once compared directly to how Patrick behaves on the show. Real sea stars do not have a brain the way most animals do. They have no centralized brain at all. Instead, they operate using a simple nervous system spread out across their body, allowing them to respond to their environment without anything resembling the kind of complex thinking that comes from a true brain. This is not a flaw in their design. It works perfectly fine for the kind of life a sea star lives, moving slowly, feeding on small prey, and reacting to touch and light without needing to solve problems the way animals with brains do. Patrick Star, throughout the entire series, is written as slow to understand things, easily confused, and generally not built for complex thinking. Viewers often treat this as simply a comedic personality choice, a character trait picked purely because a slow, confused character creates funny moments next to a more energetic character like SpongeBob. That comedic choice lines up directly with actual sea star biology. Real sea stars are not known for anything resembling intelligence, because they physically lack the kind of brain structure that would allow for it. Patrick's personality is not simply funny by coincidence. It is funny because it accurately reflects what his real-world counterpart is actually like. Sea stars have another well-known trait that connects directly to the world of Bikini Bottom, even beyond Patrick's personality. Real sea stars are capable of regrowing arms that have been lost or damaged. If a sea star loses one of its arms to a predator or an injury, it has the ability to regenerate a brand new arm over time, replacing exactly what was lost. This regenerative ability plays an important role in how sea stars survive in the wild, allowing them to recover recover from attacks that would be permanently disabling or fatal for many other kinds of animals. Sea stars typically have 5 arms, though certain species can have far more, depending on their specific type. Beneath these arms, sea stars use small structures called tube feet, tiny extensions that allow them to grip surfaces, move slowly along the ocean floor, and pry open the shells of prey like clams and mussels. None of this requires speed or complex thinking. It requires patience, grip strength, and a body built for slow, steady survival rather than quick movement or sharp thinking. Everything about Patrick, from his slow-moving nature to his simple way of understanding the world, mirrors real sea star biology almost perfectly. This is not a coincidence created by a writer looking only for cheap laughs. It reflects genuine understanding of how sea stars actually function, translated into a cartoon character built specifically around those exact traits. Now consider Squidward Tentacles, SpongeBob's grumpy neighbor. His name suggests he should be a squid, and his overall appearance, especially the shape of his head, does resemble a squid at first glance. But according to information about the character, Squidward is not actually a squid at all. He is an octopus. This detail surprises a lot of people who have watched the show for years without ever questioning it closely. Squidward is typically drawn with 6 tentacles rather than the 8 tentacles octopuses have in real life, or the 10 arms that real squids have. Despite this visual simplification, made purely for the sake of easier animation, the character is officially understood to represent an octopus, not a squid, regardless of what his name might suggest. This choice becomes especially interesting once compared to real octopus behavior. Octopuses in the wild are generally known for being solitary creatures. They do not typically live in groups or seek out social interaction the way many other animals do. They tend to prefer isolation, keeping to themselves rather than forming close social bonds with others around them. Beyond being solitary, octopuses can also display aggressive behavior, particularly when they feel threatened, crowded, or disturbed by creatures around them. Squidward's entire personality on the show lines up with these real-world traits almost perfectly. He constantly avoids social interaction with SpongeBob and Patrick, repeatedly expressing annoyance whenever they show up uninvited at his home. He prefers being left alone, often locking himself inside his house specifically to avoid contact with his neighbors. When forced into interaction he does not want, he frequently reacts with irritation, sharp comments, and open hostility. None of this personality was invented purely for comedic contrast against SpongeBob's cheerful nature. It reflects actual documented behavior patterns found in real octopuses living in the wild. There is an additional layer to this comparison that adds even more depth to Squidward's character once real octopus science gets involved. While octopuses are generally solitary and can behave aggressively, scientists have also discovered surprising exceptions to this pattern in recent years. Certain octopuses have been observed occasionally working together with other species during hunting, forming brief, temporary partnerships in order to catch prey more effectively. Interestingly, in some of these observed cases, the octopus involved has been seen physically striking or punching the other creatures it was hunting alongside, seemingly as a way of keeping its temporary hunting partners in line or under control. This detail creates an unexpectedly accurate parallel to a very specific part of Squidward's personality. Squidward rarely, if ever, shows outright affection or warmth towards SpongeBob. Yet there are moments across the show where he begrudgingly works alongside SpongeBob and Patrick when it benefits him directly, all while remaining irritated, dismissive, and quick to snap at them the entire time. This pattern, cooperating only when necessary while remaining openly annoyed by the experience, mirrors the exact kind of complicated, self-interested cooperation scientists have observed in real octopuses, working temporarily alongside other species. Move next to Eugene Krabs, more commonly known simply as Mr. Krabs, the money-obsessed owner of the Krusty Krab restaurant where SpongeBob works. Mr. Krabs represents a real crab, and much of his physical movement and mannerisms reflect actual crab behavior. Real crabs move by scuttling sideways, a movement style caused by the structure of their legs and joints, which are built in a way that makes sideways movement far more natural and efficient than moving straight forward, the way most other animals do. Mr. Krabs is frequently animated moving in this same sideways scuttling manner, directly reflecting how real crabs physically get around. Beyond his movement, Mr. Krabs' living situation on the show also reflects a detail rooted in real ocean life. He lives inside a large anchor, a heavy metal object that sinks to the ocean floor and often becomes covered in barnacles, rust, and marine growth over time as it sits underwater for extended periods. Real crabs are bottom-dwelling creatures, meaning they naturally live along the ocean floor, often using debris, rocks, and structures like sunken objects as shelter and protection from predators. An anchor resting on the seafloor is exactly the kind of object a real crab might use as a home or hiding place in the wild, making Mr. Krabs' living arrangement a small but accurate detail tied to real crab behavior. Mr. Krabs' obsession with money forms the core of his personality throughout the entire series. While this trait is clearly exaggerated for comedic effect, it connects loosely to a broader truth about crabs as scavenging animals. Crabs in the wild are often opportunistic feeders, meaning they take advantage of whatever food sources happen to be available to them, rather than hunting for one specific type of prey. This scavenging, resourceful nature translates loosely into Mr. Krabs' constant search for new ways to make money, always looking for whatever opportunity happens to be available to him, regardless of how small or questionable that opportunity might be. Now consider Sandy Cheeks, one of the most scientifically interesting characters on the entire show, specifically because of how directly her character design deals with a real biological challenge. Sandy is a squirrel, a land mammal, living inside an underwater town built entirely for sea creatures. This creates an immediate and obvious problem. Squirrels cannot breathe underwater. Squirrels are not built to survive underwater pressure, cold temperatures, or the general lack of oxygen found beneath the ocean's surface. Rather than ignoring this problem, the show builds Sandy's entire existence around solving it directly. Sandy lives inside a large dome structure called Tree Dome, a fully enclosed environment filled with air, trees, and a completely dry land-based ecosystem, allowing her to live comfortably despite being surrounded by ocean water on all sides. Whenever Sandy leaves her dome to interact with the rest of Bikini Bottom, she wears a specially designed suit, complete with a helmet filled with air, allowing her to breathe and survive outside her enclosed home. This detail represents something genuinely important about real biology, translated directly into the show's world. Sandy's suit functions as an artificial adaptation, a tool created specifically to allow a land-based creature to survive in an environment she was never naturally built for. In the real world, adaptation usually refers to natural changes that happen slowly over long periods of time, allowing species to gradually adjust to specific environments through evolution. Sandy's situation represents a different, faster version of this same basic idea, using technology and design rather than slow biological evolution, but still built around the same central concept, changing what is needed in order to survive somewhere the body was not originally designed for. This detail also reflects a genuine scientific truth about the difference between land animals and sea creatures. A land mammal like a squirrel is built for an entirely different kind of environment than a fish, crab, or sponge. Breathing air, regulating body temperature outside of water, and moving using legs built for land rather than fins built for swimming are all traits that would make survival underwater completely impossible without some form of external support. Sandy's suit is not simply a costume added for visual charm. It represents an accurate acknowledgement of a real biological limitation, paired with a creative, technology-based solution built specifically to overcome that limitation. Beyond these central characters, the show frequently introduces smaller, secondary characters that continue this same pattern of drawing directly from real marine life, sometimes in ways that go completely unnoticed by casual viewers. Consider Kevin the sea cucumber, a minor character who appears briefly across a small number of episodes. On the show, Kevin initially appears to be wearing something resembling a crown. Eventually, in one particular scene, other characters take this object away from him, causing him visible pain, and it gets passed along to SpongeBob, who assumes it is simply a hat. While this moment plays out mostly as a strange, slightly uncomfortable joke, it actually connects to a very real and very specific trait belonging to real sea cucumbers. Real sea cucumbers have retractable feeding structures, which they extend outward from their bodies specifically in order to feed. When extended, some of these feeding structures structures can visually resemble the petals of a flower, or, depending on the specific species and how the structure is arranged, something that could loosely resemble a crown sitting on top of the animal's body. Kevin's crown, treated mostly as a strange visual joke within the show, is directly based on this real biological feature found in actual sea cucumbers. Another example appears in an episode where SpongeBob adopts what the show calls a wild sea bunny. Within the show, this creature is drawn simply as a small, cartoonish rabbit, played mostly for visual comedy given the underwater setting. What many viewers do not realize is that a real creature called a sea bunny actually exists. It is a small type of sea slug, and it earns its name specifically because of its appearance. Real sea bunnies have a plump, white body covered in soft-looking, fuzzy skin, paired with small, dark projections that closely resemble a rabbit's ears, along with additional features resembling a small, fluffy tail. Sea bunnies genuinely do look remarkably similar to tiny rabbits, despite being a completely different kind of animal entirely. Interestingly, despite their adorable appearance, real sea bunnies are not gentle or harmless. They are omnivores, meaning they eat both plant material and small animals, and their diet can specifically include sea sponges. This detail creates an almost unnoticed connection to SpongeBob's own species, given that his adopted pet, based on a real sea creature, technically belongs to a group of animals capable of eating creatures exactly like him in the wild. A separate episode of the show also features a creature called a whelk, a type of sea snail. Real whelks are carnivorous, meaning they hunt and consume other animals, rather than simply eating plants or scavenging debris. Their diet in the wild includes a variety of sea creatures, including crabs and sea stars, two categories of animals directly represented among the show's own main characters. Certain whelk species are also capable of growing to unusually large sizes, another accurate detail reflected in how the show portrays this creature during its appearance. Taken together, all of these details reveal something significant about how carefully SpongeBob SquarePants was built beneath its surface-level silliness. Nearly every major character, and even many minor background characters, were designed using real biological traits taken directly from actual marine species. Patrick's lack of intelligence mirrors the true nervous system of real sea stars. Squidward's solitary, easily irritated personality mirrors documented octopus behavior. Mr. Krabs' sideways movement and scavenging mindset mirror real crab biology. Sandy's suit and dome represent a genuine, thoughtful acknowledgement of the real biological challenge a land mammal would face trying to survive underwater. Even small side characters like Kevin the sea cucumber and the sea bunny reflect specific, accurate details taken directly from real creatures living in real oceans. None of this happened by accident. It happened because the person building this world had already spent years standing in tide pools, teaching students about exactly these kinds of animals, long before any of these characters ever appeared on a television screen. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. There is one character, however, whose biology raises an even stranger and more interesting question than any of the others covered so far, because his species does something in real life that seems almost impossible to believe, something that directly explains one of the most repeated jokes across the entire history of the show. Section 5. SpongeBob's indestructibility is real biology, not a cartoon gag. Across hundreds of episodes, SpongeBob SquarePants gets hurt in ways that would be permanently disabling or fatal for almost any other living creature. He gets flattened by heavy objects and pops right back into shape moments later. He loses entire limbs during silly accidents and simply grows new ones without any real concern. He gets burned, frozen, stretched, torn apart, and thrown across entire rooms, only to bounce back to his normal, cheerful self almost immediately afterward. Most viewers watching this simply accept it as cartoon logic. Cartoons bend the rules of reality all the time. Characters fall off cliffs and survive. Characters get hit with heavy objects and shake it off within seconds. This kind of exaggerated, consequence-free physical comedy has existed in animation for decades, long before SpongeBob ever appeared on screen. But SpongeBob's specific brand of indestructibility is not simply borrowed from general cartoon tradition. It is directly tied to real biology, specifically the biology of real sea sponges, the actual living creatures SpongeBob is supposed to represent. Real sea sponges possess an extreme extraordinary ability that very few other living things on Earth can match. If a sea sponge gets physically cut into multiple pieces, something remarkable happens. Rather than dying from this kind of severe damage, the individual pieces are capable of reattaching themselves to a nearby surface and continuing to grow, eventually developing into entirely new, fully functioning sponges. Read that again slowly, because the actual scale of this ability is easy to underestimate at first. This is not simply a sponge healing a small cut or recovering from a minor injury the way many animals can. This is a sponge being physically separated into multiple individual pieces, and each of those separate pieces having the potential to survive on its own and grow into a brand new, complete sea sponge. Almost no other animal on the planet can do anything close to this. Most living things, if cut into several pieces, simply die. The pieces do not reattach. They do not regrow into new, separate versions of the original creature. A sea sponge's ability to do exactly this places it in a very small category of organisms capable of this level of physical recovery from damage that would be instantly fatal to almost anything else. Once this real biological fact is understood clearly, SpongeBob's constant, casual survival of extreme physical damage throughout the show stops looking like random cartoon exaggeration and starts looking like a fairly accurate, if heavily stylized, reflection of what his real-world counterpart is actually capable of doing. Throughout the series, one of the most frequently repeated jokes involves SpongeBob removing parts of his own body without any apparent pain or lasting consequence. He plucks off one of his arms during a moment of panic or confusion, sets it aside, and simply grows a replacement a short time later. He suffers damage to his legs during dangerous situations, loses them entirely, and continues on largely unaffected once new ones appear. Viewers laugh at these moments because they are framed as absurd, exaggerated physical comedy, delivered with the same cheerful tone SpongeBob brings to almost everything else he does. What makes this joke work so well, without viewers necessarily realizing why, is that it is not built purely from nonsense. It is built from a real, documented survival ability found in the actual animal SpongeBob is supposed to represent. Sea sponges really can recover from this kind of extreme physical separation. SpongeBob simply takes this real trait and pushes it to a much larger, more exaggerated, and far more comedic extreme, turning a slow, biological regrowth process into something that happens almost instantly, for laughs, in the middle of a children's cartoon. This raises an interesting question about intention. Did Steven Hillenburg specifically build this running joke around real sponge biology on purpose, using his marine science background to justify the humor? Or did the joke simply emerge naturally from general cartoon logic, only lining up with real biology by coincidence? Given everything already established about Hillenburg's background, spending years directly teaching students about ocean creatures and their specific survival traits, it becomes very difficult to view this as pure coincidence. A person who spent years explaining tide pool biology to children, someone who specifically taught about diversity and adaptation among sea creatures, would almost certainly have been aware of a trait as well known and remarkable as a sponge's ability to survive being cut into pieces. Whether every single joke involving SpongeBob losing a limb was consciously written with this specific fact in mind, the foundation for the joke working as smoothly as it does clearly traces back to real biological knowledge, not simply random comedic invention. There is another layer to SpongeBob's design that adds even more depth to this discussion, though it involves a detail that actually creates a small, interesting contradiction rather than a perfectly accurate scientific match. SpongeBob is very clearly modeled visually after a kitchen sponge, the kind of household cleaning tool most people have used at some point to wash dishes or wipe down a counter. His body is drawn as a simple rectangular block shape, covered in small holes, colored a bright, solid yellow. This exact look, a plain yellow rectangle covered in holes, is instantly recognizable to almost anyone who has ever picked up a sponge from underneath a kitchen sink. Here is where the small contradiction comes in. Kitchen sponges, the household cleaning tool SpongeBob's appearance is directly based on, are not actually made from real sea sponges at all. Modern kitchen sponges are typically made from plant-based materials or manufactured synthetic materials, produced specifically strictly for cleaning purposes. They share a name with real sea sponges, and they share a certain physical resemblance in terms of texture and appearance, but they come from a completely different source and serve a completely different purpose than an actual living sea sponge found in the ocean. This means SpongeBob's design technically borrows from two different things that happen to share the same basic name, but are otherwise unrelated to each other. His color, shape, and general block-like appearance come directly from a kitchen cleaning tool, not from a real living sea creature. Meanwhile, his regenerative abilities, his more general biological identity, and his overall connection to ocean life all trace back to the real, living version of a sea sponge, the kind found attached to rocks and coral reefs beneath the ocean's surface. According to information about how SpongeBob's design actually came together, Hillenburg was aware of this distinction from the very beginning. He reportedly first attempted drawing a character based on a natural, realistically shaped sea sponge, the kind that grows in irregular, organic shapes, rather than a neat, clean rectangle. This early version did not achieve the comedic effect Hillenburg was looking for. It simply looked like an accurate drawing of a real sea creature, without much personality or visual humor built into the design itself. Everything changed once Hillenburg tried a different approach, sketching the character instead as a square, block-shaped kitchen sponge. According to his own description of this moment, once he drew the character this way, it looked so funny that he immediately knew this was the right direction for the character's overall design. This single creative decision, choosing a kitchen sponge's shape over a real sea sponge's shape, explains an interesting layer of confusion that has followed the show for years. Some viewers, especially younger viewers, have grown up slightly unsure about what kind of creature SpongeBob is actually supposed to represent, given that his appearance so closely matches a common household object rather than a natural, wild-looking sea creature. This confusion is not simply a misunderstanding on the audience's part. It stems directly from Hillenburg's own intentional choice to blend visual traits from two different things sharing the same basic name, purely because the resulting design created a much funnier, more visually appealing character. This is actually part of why Hillenburg made such a deliberate point of keeping the word sponge somewhere inside the character's final name, a detail already established earlier in this video. He specifically did not want children to become confused about what type of creature the character was meant to represent. Reports around this decision even suggest a fairly specific concern behind it. Given SpongeBob's yellow color and rectangular block shape, there was a real risk that young viewers, without a clear verbal reminder built into the character's actual name, might mistake him for a block of cheese rather than any kind of sponge at all. This detail reveals just how carefully thought out even the smallest elements of SpongeBob's design and naming truly were. Hillenburg was not simply throwing together a colorful, silly-looking character purely for visual appeal. He was actively thinking through how audiences, especially young audiences without much background knowledge, would interpret the character's appearance, and he made specific choices, including the character's final name, in order to guide that interpretation toward the correct understanding. Despite this slight blending of kitchen sponge appearance and real sea sponge biology, SpongeBob still retains several genuine, accurate traits tied directly to real sea sponges, beyond simply his regenerative abilities. Real sea sponges are what scientists call filter feeders, meaning they survive by pulling water through small holes in their bodies and filtering out tiny food particles as the water passes through. This process also plays an important, larger role in ocean ecosystems, since sponges help filter and clean the water around them as they feed, benefiting the wider environment they live in, not just themselves. Real sea sponges are also generally stationary creatures, meaning they attach themselves permanently to one fixed spot, usually a rock or a section of a coral reef, and remain there for essentially their entire lives. They do not move around freely the way fish or crabs do. Once attached to a surface, a sea sponge typically stays in that exact location indefinitely, filtering water and slowly growing over time. SpongeBob, obviously, does not behave this way at all. He walks, he runs, he rides jellyfish, he goes on wild adventures across Bikini Bottom on a near constant basis. This represents one of the clearest and most obvious departures from real sponge biology found anywhere in the show. Real sea sponges simply do not move the way SpongeBob does, and they certainly do not hold jobs, cook food, or interact socially with other creatures the way he constantly does throughout the series. Interestingly, this exact contradiction has actually been addressed directly by Hillenburg himself in comments he made about the character. He described how SpongeBob has these creative moments where he can reshape or transform himself in ways that feel dynamic and lively. He then directly compared this to real sponges, pointing out that most sponges in the ocean are sedentary, meaning they attach themselves to a rock and remain there, quietly filtering food from the water for the rest of their lives, reproducing occasionally, but otherwise staying largely still and unmoving. Hillenburg went on to acknowledge, in a light-hearted way, that while real sponges are certainly interesting creatures worth studying, they are simply not very kinetic. They are not built for movement the way SpongeBob constantly is throughout the show. He specifically pointed out, somewhat jokingly, that real sponges are not mobile, and quite obviously, they do not cook Krabby Patties. This comment is worth paying close attention to, because it shows that Hillenburg was fully aware of exactly where his character strayed away from strict biological accuracy, and he was comfortable acknowledging that gap directly, rather than pretending the show was meant to be a perfectly accurate scientific depiction of real sponge behavior. SpongeBob was never intended to be a documentary-style representation of a sea sponge's real life. He was always meant to be a fictional character built using real sponge traits as inspiration, exaggerated and reshaped wherever necessary in order to create comedy, personality, and an engaging, adventurous main character capable of carrying an entire television series. This balance, staying loosely grounded in real biology while freely bending or breaking that biology whenever the story or the comedy required it, appears to be a consistent pattern found throughout the entire show, not just with SpongeBob himself. Patrick's slow thinking accurately reflects real sea star biology, yet Patrick also talks, wears clothing occasionally, and lives inside a house built directly into a rock, none of which any real sea star could ever actually do. Squidward's personality accurately reflects real octopus behavior, yet Squidward also plays musical instruments, paints artwork, and lives inside a home shaped like an Easter Island statue, none of which any real octopus is remotely capable of doing. The show consistently follows this same basic formula across nearly every character. Start with a real, biologically accurate trait taken directly from an actual sea creature. Build the character's core personality and behavior around that real trait. Then freely add whatever additional human-like abilities, activities, and personality quirks are needed in order to make the character funny, relatable, and capable of participating in an ongoing television series filled with jobs, friendships, arguments, and adventures. SpongeBob's constant survival of extreme physical damage fits perfectly into this same pattern. The core idea, surviving damage that should be fatal, comes directly from real sponge biology. The specific way this ability gets used throughout the show, instant regrowth, exaggerated cartoon violence, characters casually removing and reattaching their own limbs without any real concern, comes from cartoon logic layered directly on top of that real biological foundation. Understanding this changes how one of the show's most repeated and most casually accepted jokes should be viewed. SpongeBob getting flattened, torn apart, or losing a limb, only to immediately bounce back with his usual cheerful energy, is not simply a random cartoon convention borrowed from general animation history. It is a direct, if heavily exaggerated, reflection of one of the most remarkable and least widely known abilities found anywhere in the animal kingdom: the real, documented capacity of sea sponges to survive being physically cut apart and regrow into entirely new, complete organisms. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. This connection between cartoon comedy and real biological fact eventually led to something that no one working on the original show could have possibly predicted decades ago. Years after SpongeBob SquarePants first premiered, actual scientists working far out in the deep ocean would stumble across something that seemed to prove, in the most literal and unexpected way possible, just how closely this cartoon world had been built around real ocean life all along. Section 6. Noah found the real SpongeBob and Patrick on the ocean floor. For more than 20 years, SpongeBob and Patrick existed only as drawings, voiced by actors, brought to life through animation on a television screen. Nobody expected their real-world counterparts to ever appear side by side in an actual photograph taken from the actual ocean floor, showing an actual sponge sitting directly next to an actual sea star in a way that looked almost too too perfect to be real. Then, in the summer of 2021, that is exactly what happened. The discovery came from a team working with NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, a United States government agency responsible for studying oceans, weather, and the atmosphere. NOAA regularly sends out research ships to explore parts of the ocean that most people never think about, places far too deep and far too dangerous for regular divers to reach. These missions often involve areas of the seafloor that have never been photographed or studied closely before, sometimes revealing creatures and landscapes that look more like something from another planet than from Earth. One of these research missions involved a ship called the Okeanos Explorer, a vessel specifically built and equipped for deep ocean exploration. As part of an expedition known as Atlantic Stepping Stones, the ship was sent out to study a specific underwater formation called the Retriever Seamount, located off the coast of New England. A seamount is essentially an underwater mountain, rising up from the ocean floor, but never reaching the surface of the water. Seamounts are often extremely deep, extremely remote, and largely unexplored, simply because reaching them requires specialized equipment capable of surviving intense pressure far below where sunlight can reach. The Retriever Seamount fits this description exactly, sitting far beneath the surface of the Atlantic Ocean, well outside the range of ordinary diving equipment. To explore a location like this, scientists cannot simply put on a wetsuit and swim down to take a look. Instead, missions like this rely on a piece of equipment called a remotely operated vehicle, often shortened to ROV. This is essentially an underwater robot, connected back to the ship above by a long cable, controlled by a team of scientists and engineers watching everything happen through cameras mounted on the vehicle itself. The ROV can travel to depths far beyond what any human diver could safely reach, capturing video and photographs of parts of the ocean that remain almost completely unseen by human eyes. On July 27, 2021, the team controlling the ROV during this expedition was exploring the depths of the Retriever Seamount when they came across something that immediately caught their attention. Sitting on the seafloor at a depth of 6,184 feet, the ROV's camera captured an image of a bright yellow sponge, roughly square in shape, sitting directly beside a 5-pointed pink sea star. Take a moment to really picture the depth involved here. 6,184 feet below the surface of the ocean is far beyond where sunlight can reach. It is a place of complete darkness, extreme cold, and crushing water pressure, an environment that very few living things are built to survive in, let alone thrive in. And yet, sitting quietly at this extreme depth, largely unnoticed until the ROV's camera happened to pass directly over it, was a sponge and a sea star, positioned right next to each other, looking almost exactly like two of the most recognizable cartoon characters in the world. The team aboard the ship was reportedly exploring the seamount as part of a broader scientific survey, documenting deep sea life and unusual ocean formations along the way. This particular discovery was shared publicly through a live broadcast on social media, allowing people outside the scientific team to see the footage as it was being captured in real time. It was through this public broadcast that the resemblance between these two ocean creatures and SpongeBob and Patrick first became widely noticed. Among the people who saw this footage was Christopher Ma, a marine biologist working at the Smithsonian's National Museum of Natural History. Ma is recognized as an expert specifically in the study of sea stars, meaning he has spent significant time researching exactly the kind of animal captured in this particular photograph. When Ma saw the images from the expedition, he immediately noticed the uncanny resemblance to the two famous cartoon characters. Ma shared his reaction publicly, writing that he normally tries to avoid making comparisons like this between real animals and cartoon characters, but in this particular case, he felt the resemblance was simply too strong to ignore. He specifically referred to the pair in the photograph as looking exactly like SpongeBob and Patrick, sharing the image alongside his comment. This reaction from a professional marine biologist matters because it confirms that this was not simply a case of casual internet users seeing a cartoon connection where none really existed. Someone who has spent his entire career studying sea stars specifically, someone whose job depends on being able to accurately identify and understand these creatures, looked at this photograph and immediately made the same connection that anyone who grew up watching the show would make instantly. Once the photograph became public, it did not take long to spread across social media and eventually get picked up by larger news outlets covering science and ocean discoveries. People who had grown up watching SpongeBob SquarePants found themselves looking at what appeared to be genuine, real-life proof that the cartoon's central friendship had some kind of basis in reality, captured by accident by a scientific research team who had not set out looking for anything like this at all. There is something worth appreciating about how this discovery actually happened. Nobody involved in this expedition was searching for a real-life version of SpongeBob and Patrick. The team was conducting serious scientific research, mapping out an unexplored underwater mountain, documenting deep-sea creatures as part of a broader effort to understand more about ocean ecosystems that remain largely unknown even today. The resemblance to the cartoon characters was a complete accident, a strange and delightful coincidence, discovered purely because two creatures happened to be sitting next to each other in a way that visually matched two characters from a children's television show. This detail actually connects back to something already established earlier in this video. Steven Hillenburg built SpongeBob and Patrick using real biological traits taken from actual sea sponges and actual sea stars. The fact that real versions of these two types of creatures could be found sitting together on the ocean floor, looking remarkably similar to their cartoon counterparts, is not entirely surprising once this connection is understood. Hillenburg was not inventing fantasy creatures with no real-world basis. He was building cartoon versions of animals that already existed, shaped by real traits and real appearances found throughout the ocean. Finding a real sponge and a real sea star that happened to visually resemble the finished cartoon designs simply confirms how closely those original designs were rooted in actual sea life to begin with. However, the story does not end with a heartwarming coincidence about two ocean creatures sitting peacefully side by side. Christopher Ma, drawing on his actual expertise as a sea star specialist, added an important and slightly less comforting detail to the discovery once the excitement around the photograph began to spread. Ma explained that the specific species of sea star captured in this photograph has actually been observed in real scientific studies feeding on sponges. This is a significant detail because it means the real-life relationship between these two creatures is not the warm, loyal friendship shown between SpongeBob and Patrick throughout the entire television series. In the real ocean, this type of sea star is a predator, capable of eating this type of sponge. Ma even added a small, somewhat unsettling possibility connected directly to the photograph itself. He suggested that it was entirely possible this exact interaction, a sea star feeding on a sponge, may have actually taken place at this exact location shortly after the ROV's camera had already moved on and stopped recording. In other words, the peaceful-looking pair captured in that famous photograph might not have stayed peaceful for very long once the cameras were no longer watching. This detail creates a strange and interesting contrast with the entire tone of the original cartoon. SpongeBob and Patrick are best friends throughout the entire show, supporting each other, going on adventures together, and remaining loyal to one another through nearly every situation the show ever puts them through. Their real-world counterparts, according to actual scientific observation, exist in a completely different kind of relationship. One where the sea star represents a genuine threat to the sponge's survival, rather than a loyal companion standing beside it. Ma did not share this discovery purely to point out something dark or upsetting about ocean life. He specifically expressed hope that the widespread attention brought by this photograph would help raise awareness about deep-sea habitats in general, environments that remain threatened today by activities like deep-sea mining and deep-sea fishing. He noted that he was happy the photograph brought so much delight to people who saw it circulating online, while also hoping it might encourage more people to think seriously about protecting these deep ocean environments, places most people will never see directly with their own eyes. This point deserves attention because it connects directly back to something Hillenburg himself expressed many years earlier about his own hopes for what SpongeBob SquarePants could accomplish. Hillenburg had specifically hoped that watching the show might inspire viewers to care more about protecting the ocean and its creatures. Here, decades later, a real photograph accidentally resembling his cartoon characters was doing something remarkably similar, drawing public attention toward a real, fragile ocean environment that badly needs more awareness and protection. The retriever seamount itself, the specific location where this discovery took place, remains a place most people will likely never learn much about beyond this single viral photograph. Seamounts like this one exist scattered throughout the world's oceans, many of them still completely unexplored, hiding countless species and geological features that no human being has ever directly observed. The fact that this particular expedition happened to capture footage of a real-life SpongeBob and Patrick was, in many ways, a small, lucky byproduct of a much larger and more serious mission focused on documenting deep-sea biodiversity in an area of the ocean that remains largely unknown even to modern science. It is worth remembering that this discovery, striking as it was, represents only one single moment captured during one single expedition exploring one specific underwater mountain. Deep-sea environments across the rest of the world's oceans remain filled with countless other creatures, many of which likely have never been photographed, named, or studied at all. Every so often, missions like this one manage to capture something that briefly connects the deep, mostly hidden world of the ocean floor back to popular culture in a way that grabs public attention, even if only for a short period of time before the news cycle moves on to something else. This particular discovery did more than simply create a fun, shareable photograph for people to enjoy online for a few days. It served as a small, unexpected reminder that the ocean, even in 2021, more than 2 decades after SpongeBob SquarePants first premiered, still contains surprises that no cartoon writer could have deliberately planned or predicted. Real sponges and real sea stars really do exist together in the deep ocean, occasionally close enough to each other and similar enough in appearance to briefly convince the entire internet that 2 cartoon characters had somehow been found alive on the ocean floor. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Once this connection between fiction and reality became public knowledge, it naturally led toward another surprising piece of history tied directly to the show, one involving an entirely different kind of real-world recognition. This time, the connection would not come from scientists stumbling across a coincidental resemblance out in the wild. It would come from scientists deciding quite deliberately to give an entirely new species a name taken directly from the cartoon itself. Section 7. A real species was named after him. Somewhere deep inside a rainforest on the island of Borneo, in a part of Malaysia called Sarawak, a small team of scientists once knelt down on the forest floor and found something growing there that none of them had ever seen before. They were not looking for anything related to cartoons. They were mycologists, meaning scientists who study fungi, a group of living things that includes mushrooms, molds, and many other organisms most people rarely think about. Their work involved traveling to remote, largely unexplored forests around the world, spending months at a time carefully searching the ground for fungi that had never been officially studied or named by science. This kind of work sounds slow and quiet, and in many ways it is. Fungi are often small, easy to overlook, and can look extremely similar to other species that have already been discovered. Finding a completely new species, one that has never been recorded anywhere in scientific history, takes patience, expert knowledge, and a great deal of careful searching through places most people would simply walk past without a second glance. In 2008, during one of these careful searches through the forests of Lambir Hills National Park in Sarawak, a team that included researchers Dennis Desjardins, Kabir Pei, and Thomas Bruns collected a strange, unfamiliar-looking specimen growing on the forest floor. This early collection did not immediately lead to a full scientific description. It simply got noted and studied further as part of a larger research effort focused on documenting fungal life in that particular tropical rainforest. What made this particular specimen stand out was its appearance. It did not look like a typical mushroom, the kind with a stem and a rounded cap that most people picture when they think of a mushroom growing in the woods. Instead, this fungus had a strange, rubbery, sponge-like body with a bright orange color and a surface covered in deep folds and hollow pockets. There was no stem at all. The entire thing sat directly on the ground, shaped almost like a rounded, wrinkled ball, with a texture unlike most other fungi the researchers had studied before. The researchers were initially uncertain about exactly what kind of fungus they had found. Fungi are generally divided into large scientific groups based on how they reproduce and how their bodies are structured internally. This particular specimen was strange enough in appearance that the team was not immediately sure which of these major groups it belonged to. It took closer examination and further research to properly place it within the correct scientific category. Eventually, the team determined that this new specimen was closely related to another fungus that had only recently been described a couple of years earlier, in 2009, coming from tropical forests in Thailand. That earlier fungus had been placed into a newly created genus called Spongiforma, a genus name specifically chosen because of how closely the fungus resembled a sea sponge in its overall shape and texture. Once the team compared their new Borneo specimen to this Thailand species more closely, using both physical examination and genetic testing, they found that the two were closely related, sharing a large percentage of matching genetic material, while still being different enough to be considered two separate, distinct species. This meant the researchers had discovered a brand new second species belonging to the Spongiforma genus, one that had never been formally identified or named before. Now came the part of the process where scientists get to make a very specific and often overlooked decision, choosing exactly what to name a brand new species. Scientific names typically follow a very particular format. Every species gets two parts to its official scientific name. The first part identifies the genus, the broader group the species belongs to. The second part, called the specific epithet, identifies that exact individual species within the genus. For the genus name, the researchers already had Spongiforma to work with, since this new fungus belonged to that same group. This left the second part of the name still needing to be decided, the specific epithet that would separate this exact species from every other species in the world. Looking closely at the fungus itself, the resemblance to something very specific and very recognizable became hard to ignore. The bright orange color, the rubbery, sponge-like texture, the rounded, block-like shape with hollow pockets running through it. According to the researchers themselves, the fungus's overall appearance reminded them strongly of a certain well-known cartoon character, one built directly around the appearance of a sponge. The researchers decided to name the new species Spongiforma SquarePantsy, directly honoring SpongeBob SquarePants, the cartoon character whose entire physical design was built around looking like a sponge in the first place. The specific epithet SquarePantsy is essentially a scientific, Latin-styled version of the name SquarePants, formed by adjusting the character's surname to fit the naming rules used in formal scientific classification. This name became official once the species was formally described in a scientific paper published in the academic journal Mycologia. The paper, titled Spongiforma SquarePantsy, a new species of gasteroid bolete from Borneo, was submitted in December 2010 and accepted for publication in March 2011, with the description appearing online in May 2011. It was written and published by Denis Desjardins, Kabir Pei, and Thomas Bruns, the same three researchers who had originally collected and studied the specimen. This detail matters because it shows that this was not some casual, unofficial nickname given by researchers joking around after a long day of fieldwork. This was a fully formal, peer-reviewed scientific naming, published through the same rigorous academic process used to officially document every new species discovered anywhere in the world. The name Spongiforma SquarePantsy is not an informal joke floating around online. It is the fungus's actual, permanent, scientifically recognized name, published and recorded exactly the same way any other newly discovered species would be. quickly. Understanding a little more about what this fungus actually looks like helps explain exactly why the researchers felt the SpongeBob comparison was so fitting. According to the official scientific description, the fruiting body of this fungus, meaning the visible part that grows above ground, typically measures somewhere between 30 to 50 millimeters wide and 20 to 30 millimeters tall. In simpler terms, this places the fungus at roughly the size of a small round fruit, something that could comfortably fit inside the palm of a hand. The fungus lacks what is called a stipe, meaning it has no stem at all connecting it to the ground. Instead, it grows directly attached to the earth, appearing as an irregular, rounded shape rather than the classic stem and cap structure most people associate with mushrooms. Its surface is described as having a convoluted, wrinkled appearance, almost brain-like in texture, filled with small, hollow chambers that give it a spongy, porous look, similar to a real sea sponge. Its color is described as a bright, deep orange, a shade vivid enough to stand out clearly against the darker browns and greens typically found across a forest floor. Beyond its appearance, the fungus also gives off a noticeable smell, described in scientific reporting as either fruity or strongly musty, depending on the exact specimen and conditions. One particular detail about this fungus connects directly and almost perfectly back to its cartoon namesake. According to researchers who studied it, if the fungus becomes compressed or has water squeezed out of it, it is capable of returning back to its original shape afterward, much like squeezing water out of a real sponge and watching it slowly expand back to its normal form once released. This detail alone makes the comparison to a sponge feel far less like a stretch, and far more like an accurate, literal description of how the fungus physically behaves. Beyond simply looking and behaving like a sponge, the fungus also carries specific microscopic details that scientists use to formally distinguish it from its closely related cousin species found in Thailand. Its spores, the tiny reproductive cells fungi use to spread and create new growth, are shaped somewhat like almonds, and their surfaces are covered in a slightly rough, textured pattern under close microscopic examination. These spores measure roughly 10 to 12.5 micrometers long and 6 to 7 micrometers wide, an extremely small size that requires specialized laboratory equipment to properly observe and measure. While these precise measurements might sound overly technical, they matter enormously to the scientists responsible for confirming that this fungus truly represented a brand new, distinct species, rather than simply being another example of the already known Thailand species. Even though genetic testing showed the two fungi were closely related, sharing a very high percentage of matching genetic material, small but consistent differences in color, smell, and spore structure confirmed that these were indeed two separate species, each deserving its own distinct scientific name. Once this new species was officially named and published, the story did not stay confined to academic journals and scientific research circles for very long. Naming a newly discovered fungus after a well-known cartoon character created an easy and appealing angle for general news outlets to pick up and share with a much wider audience. Coverage of this discovery appeared across a range of major outlets shortly after the official publication in 2011. Articles appeared discussing the newly named fungus, often playfully referring to it as a real-world piece of Bikini Bottom found growing in the middle of a rainforest thousands of miles away from any ocean. San Francisco State University, where lead researcher Dennis Desjardins worked, also published information about the discovery, further helping the story spread beyond strictly scientific audiences and into general public awareness. This wave of media attention highlights something interesting about how science and popular culture occasionally intersect in unexpected ways. Most newly discovered fungus species never receive any public attention outside of specialized academic journals. The vast majority of new species identified by researchers each year remain almost entirely unknown outside of the scientific community studying them directly. This particular fungus became a rare exception, specifically because its name created an immediate, easily understandable connection to something the general public already recognized and loved. Desjardins Desjardins himself commented on the broader significance of discoveries like this one, beyond simply the fun of naming a fungus after a cartoon character. He pointed out that finding entirely new, previously undocumented species, even ones as visually striking and easily recognizable as this fungus, shows just how much of the natural world still remains unexplored and undocumented by science. According to information shared alongside the discovery, conservative estimates suggest that a very large percentage of all fungi species existing in the world, potentially as many as 19 out of every 20 fungi species, remain completely unnamed and undocumented by science today. This statistic puts the entire discovery into a much larger and more meaningful context. This was not simply a fun, quirky moment where scientists decided to name something after a cartoon purely for entertainment value. It represented a genuine, meaningful scientific discovery, adding one more documented species to a natural world that still contains an enormous number of completely unknown and unnamed living things, many of which may be sitting quietly in remote forests, entirely unnoticed, similar to how this particular fungus sat undiscovered until a dedicated research team happened to find it during a careful survey of the forest floor. There is something worth appreciating about the fact that this connection between a real scientific discovery and a children's cartoon happened specifically because of biology, not because of any deliberate publicity effort or marketing partnership. Desjardins, P., and Bruns were professional research scientists focused entirely on documenting fungal diversity in tropical rainforests. They were not searching for a fun way to generate media attention. They were doing serious academic fieldwork, and the resemblance to SpongeBob was something they noticed naturally, based purely on the fungus's genuine physical appearance, texture, and color. This mirrors something already established earlier regarding SpongeBob's original design. Steven Hillenburg built the character using real, accurate traits taken directly from an actual sea sponge, before adjusting the shape slightly to resemble a kitchen sponge for comedic effect. Now, years after the show's premiere, a real, living organism discovered in a completely different part of the world happened to closely resemble that same fictional design, purely because both the cartoon character and the real fungus share genuine, natural, sponge-like characteristics. This means SpongeBob's connection to real biology did not stop at the characters directly inspired by Hillenburg's original classroom drawings. It extended forward in time, well past the character's creation, eventually connecting to an entirely new species discovered more than a decade after the show first premiered. One found in a rainforest, on solid ground, thousands of miles away from any ocean, yet still carrying enough resemblance to a sea sponge that a team of professional mycologists felt the SpongeBob comparison was the most fitting name they could give it. Once this small, quiet moment of scientific naming became public knowledge, it added yet another entry to a growing and increasingly surprising list of ways SpongeBob SquarePants has managed to leave a mark on areas of the real world that have nothing to do with television or entertainment at all. A cartoon originally built from a marine biology teacher's classroom comic had now become significant enough, recognizable enough, and beloved enough that actual practicing scientists chose to permanently attach its main character's name to a newly discovered species, officially recorded in the global scientific record for as long as that record continues to exist. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. This pattern of unexpected real-world recognition raises a natural next question. If a single cartoon character can end up lending his name to an actual scientific species discovered in a rainforest, it becomes worth asking just how far this show's overall reach and influence has actually extended across the wider world, beyond just biology and science, and into the much larger scale of television history, global audiences, and cultural influence as a whole. Section 8. The most measured, most awarded kids show on Earth. Most television shows fade quietly after a handful of seasons. Ratings drop, networks move on. New shows take their place. This is simply how television has worked for decades. Very few shows manage to stay relevant for more than a few years, and even fewer manage to remain genuinely popular decades after they first began. SpongeBob SquarePants did not follow this pattern. Instead of fading, it kept growing, kept winning awards, kept breaking records, and kept adding new viewers even as its original audience grew into adults with children and grandchildren of their own. The scale of this success is not simply a matter of opinion or personal impression. It is something that can actually be measured, documented, and confirmed through official records, award counts, and viewership numbers collected over more than 2 decades. Start with how the show performed the moment it premiered. SpongeBob SquarePants first aired on Nickelodeon on July 17, 1999. Right from this very first appearance, the show made an immediate impact. It became an instant hit for Nickelodeon, quickly becoming the highest-rated and most-watched animated show airing on Saturday mornings, beating out Pokemon, one of the biggest entertainment franchises in the entire world at that exact moment in time. Beating a franchise as massive as Pokemon within its very first stretch on air was not a small accomplishment. Pokemon during this period was one of the most talked-about pieces of children's entertainment anywhere on the planet, driving video games, trading cards, toys, and a massive television following. For a brand new show, one built around a character nobody had ever heard of before, to immediately surpass something with that level of existing popularity showed that Nickelodeon had found something genuinely special right from the very beginning. From that point onward, SpongeBob SquarePants continued to hold its position as Nickelodeon's highest-rated program. According to records tracking the show's performance, it only lost this top position briefly a small number of times across its entire run, quickly returning to the top spot each time. This means that across more than 2 decades of television, through countless changes in entertainment trends, streaming habits, and children's viewing preferences, this single show remained, almost continuously, the most watched program on one of the largest children's television networks in the world. The show's episode count alone tells a story of remarkable staying power. During its 8th season, SpongeBob SquarePants became the Nickelodeon series with the most total episodes ever produced, surpassing the 172 episodes previously held by Rugrats, another extremely popular and long-running Nickelodeon show. Passing this milestone meant SpongeBob had officially outlasted, in terms of pure episode count, every single other show Nickelodeon had ever produced up to that point. The show did not stop growing after reaching this milestone. It continued producing new seasons and new episodes for years afterward, eventually reaching a scale far beyond what almost any other children's animated show has ever achieved. In 2025, SpongeBob SquarePants officially became the longest-running American children's animated series of all time, surpassing Arthur, a long-running educational cartoon that had previously held this exact record for many years. Overtaking Arthur specifically deserves attention because Arthur itself was already widely recognized as one of the most successful and long-lasting children's shows in American television history. For SpongeBob to eventually surpass even that level of longevity places it in a category almost no other children's animated show has ever reached. This was not a show that simply lasted a long time by industry standards. It became the single longest-running example of its entire category in the history of American television. Beyond simple longevity, the show's success can also be measured through the sheer number of awards it has collected over the years. According to detailed records tracking its award history, SpongeBob SquarePants has won 6 Annie Awards, a set of honors specifically recognizing excellence in the field of animation. It has also won 8 Golden Reel Awards, an award category focused specifically on outstanding achievement in sound editing for film and television. Alongside these, the show has earned 4 Emmy Awards, one of the most widely recognized honors in all of American television, awarded across many different categories, covering both live action and animated programming. The show has also received 2 BAFTA Children's Awards, an honor given out by the British Academy of Film and Television Arts, specifically recognizing outstanding children's programming, showing that its recognition and acclaim extended well beyond the United States alone. Perhaps most impressive among all of these honors is the show's performance at the Kids' Choice Awards, an award show specifically voted on by children, representing the exact audience the show was originally built for. SpongeBob SquarePants holds a record 22 Kids' Choice Awards, more than any other show has ever received at this particular award ceremony. This number matters enormously, because unlike some other awards decided by small panels of industry judges, Kids' Choice Awards are voted on directly by the young viewers watching these shows. Winning 22 of these awards means an entire generation of children, voting year after year across a long stretch of time, kept choosing this same show above every other option available to them. Beyond individual episodes and seasons, the show's success expanded into other major areas of entertainment as well. The franchise grew to include 4 full feature films, in addition to the original television series. It also expanded into 2 separate spin-off television shows, further extending the reach of the Bikini Bottom universe beyond just SpongeBob and his immediate group of friends. In 2017, the franchise achieved something very few cartoons ever managed to accomplish. A musical stage adaptation called the SpongeBob Musical premiered on Broadway, one of the most respected and competitive stages in all of American theater. This adaptation featured original music contributed by an impressive lineup of well-known musical artists, including Steven Tyler, Sarah Bareilles, and John Legend. The musical went on to earn 12 Tony Award nominations, one of the highest honors available in American theater, including a nomination for Best Performance by a Leading Actor, recognizing actor Ethan Slater's portrayal of SpongeBob on stage. 12 Tony nominations for a musical based on a children's cartoon is an extraordinary achievement. Broadway productions are typically built around serious dramatic material, classic literary adaptations, or long-standing theatrical traditions. For a show originally built around a cheerful, silly sea sponge to translate successfully enough into a stage musical to earn this level of recognition from the American theater industry shows just how far the franchise's creative reputation had grown, far beyond simply being seen as entertainment made purely for young children. The show's reach across the world also became measurable in very concrete terms. According to information provided by Nickelodeon, SpongeBob SquarePants is distributed in more than 170 countries around the world and has been translated into more than 24 different languages, with some sources indicating the number of languages may run even higher, closer to 30. Averaged across each quarter of the year, the show reportedly draws in more than 100 million viewers, a number that places it among the most widely watched television programs anywhere on the planet, regardless of genre or intended audience. To put a number like 170 countries into perspective, there are only around 195 countries recognized in the entire world today. A distribution reach of 170 countries means this single cartoon about a sponge who lives in a pineapple and works at a fast food restaurant is being broadcast in the overwhelming majority of nations that exist anywhere on Earth. This level of reach also translated into massive financial success, tied to the broader SpongeBob brand. According to business reporting on the franchise, SpongeBob SquarePants has generated more than $13 billion in lifetime retail sales connected to consumer products carrying the character's likeness, covering everything from toys and clothing to countless other branded merchandise items sold around the world. An achievement this large and this financially significant naturally drew attention from official record-keeping organizations as well. Guinness World Records specifically recognized SpongeBob SquarePants as the most popular children's television show in the world, based on measurable popularity data collected and compared against other children's programming globally. According to Guinness, the show was found to be 47 times more popular than the average television show, and it ranked higher in popularity than every single other children's show anywhere in the world at the time this measurement was taken. Guinness also highlighted an interesting detail connected to the show's original run and its lasting audience. Because the show first premiered back in 1999, many of the original young viewers who watched the very first episodes as children have since grown into fully grown adults. This means SpongeBob's audience today includes not just a new generation of young children discovering the show for the first time, but also the original generation of fans, now adults, many of whom continue watching, referencing, and celebrating the show well into their adult lives. The show's cultural relevance was further confirmed through a moment few cartoons ever get the chance to experience. During Super Bowl 58, one of the most widely watched television broadcasts in the entire United States each year, Nickelodeon aired an animated version of the show's broadcast, opening with a performance of the song Sweet Victory, a song originally featured in one of the show's most beloved episodes. This performance incorporated real footage and imagery connected to the actual football teams competing in that specific Super Bowl matchup, blending real-world sports coverage directly with content from the cartoon. Having a segment built around your show air during the Super Bowl, one of the single largest television broadcasting events in the entire country each year, says something significant about how deeply embedded SpongeBob SquarePants has become within mainstream American culture as a whole. This was not simply a rerun airing on a children's channel. It was content built specifically for one of the most watched broadcasts of the entire television calendar year, reaching an audience far beyond the show's usual base of younger viewers. All of these individual facts, the record-breaking episode count, the historic run length surpassing Arthur, the 22 Kids' Choice Awards, the Emmy and BAFTA recognition, the Broadway musical earning 12 Tony nominations, the massive global distribution across more than 170 countries, the Guinness World Record confirming its position as the most popular children's show on the planet, and its appearance during one of America's largest television broadcasts of the year, combined to tell a much larger story than simple popularity alone. This is not a show that simply found an audience and held onto it for a while before eventually fading, the way most television programs eventually do. It became something closer to a permanent, deeply embedded piece of global entertainment history, one whose achievements can be measured clearly through record books, award counts, and viewership numbers spanning more than 2 decades of continuous, sustained success. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Yet, as impressive as these official numbers and awards are, they only tell part of the larger story behind why this particular show managed to reach this level of lasting influence. Awards and viewership numbers explain how successful the show became within traditional television measurements. They do not fully explain how the show also managed to spread itself into an entirely different world altogether, one that barely even existed when the show first premiered back in 1999. A world built not around television broadcasts and award ceremonies, but around something far more chaotic, far more spontaneous, and far more difficult to measure using official numbers alone. Section 9. It became the internet's most powerful meme machine by coincidence of timing. Long before the word meme became something almost everyone online understood and used regularly, SpongeBob SquarePants was already quietly building the exact kind of material that would one day come to dominate internet culture completely. Nobody working on the show back in 1999 could have predicted this. The internet, at that time, barely resembled what it would eventually become. Yet somehow, decades later, this single cartoon ended up more deeply connected to internet meme culture than almost any other television show in history. To understand exactly how significant this connection became, it helps to look at actual numbers tracking how much meme content exists, specifically tied to SpongeBob SquarePants. According to Don Caldwell, the managing editor of Know Your Meme, a website specifically dedicated to documenting and archiving internet memes, SpongeBob SquarePants has roughly 90 individual sub-entries on the site, along with close to 290 separate related entry search results. To put this number into proper context, Caldwell specifically compared this total to The Simpsons, a show widely recognized as the longest-running scripted primetime series in American television history. Even against a show with that level of long-running cultural dominance, SpongeBob SquarePants still holds more documented memes on Know Your Meme than The Simpsons does. Caldwell describes SpongeBob as one of the most significant television series in the entire history of internet memes. A strong statement considering just how many decades of television exist for memes to potentially draw from. This raises an obvious question. Why did this particular show, more than almost any other cartoon or television series ever produced, become such a dominant force, specifically within internet meme culture? The answer appears to come down largely to timing, combined with the specific style of humor the show consistently used throughout its run. Consider who exactly was creating internet memes during the early years of meme culture, roughly during the 2000s and into the early 2010s, when platforms like early internet forums, image boards, and eventually social media sites began shaping what we now recognize as meme culture. The people creating and sharing this content were largely young adults and teenagers at the time. These were, in many cases, the exact same people who had grown up as children specifically watching SpongeBob SquarePants during its earliest and most popular seasons. This overlap in timing created something powerful. The generation actively shaping and defining early internet meme culture was the same generation that already had years of deep, shared familiarity with SpongeBob SquarePants sitting in their memory from childhood. They did not need to be introduced to the show or explain who the characters were. Nearly everyone already understood the references instantly, because nearly everyone had already spent years watching the exact same episodes as kids. This shared familiarity created an incredibly efficient shortcut for humor. According to comments from animator Sean Donati discussing this exact phenomenon, SpongeBob is so deeply embedded in that generation's collective memory that it comes packaged with all of its context already built in. This meant meme creators could get straight to the specific joke or emotion they wanted to express, without needing to spend any extra time explaining the reference itself. Donati specifically noted how difficult this same level of instant, shared understanding is to achieve using other franchises, since very few other pieces of media manage to reach the same level of universal, generation-wide familiarity. Beyond simple familiarity, the actual content and style of the show itself turned out to be extremely well suited for meme culture, almost by accident, given that meme culture as it exists today did not even exist yet when the show's earliest episodes were originally written and animated. According to analysis of the show's humor style, SpongeBob frequently relies on bizarre, exaggerated imagery, unexpected visual gags, and a general sense of laid-back, surreal weirdness running throughout many of its jokes. Jokes in the show often linger slightly longer than a viewer might expect, creating a small, strange moment of discomfort that then flips suddenly into something funny once the joke fully lands. This specific comedic rhythm, built around unexpected pauses and unusual escalation, closely mirrors the exact kind of humor that dominates a huge amount of modern internet content, where absurdity often builds gradually through stillness and repetition, rather than fast, obvious jokes delivered quickly one after another. This overlap between the show's original comedic style and the natural comedic rhythm of internet culture helped SpongeBob content translate incredibly easily into meme formats that rely heavily on freezing a single expressive image or a short clip and reusing it repeatedly across completely different contexts and conversations. Several extremely well-known internet memes can be traced back to specific, exact moments taken directly from individual episodes of the show, each with a clearly documented origin. One of the most widely recognized examples is known as the mocking SpongeBob meme. This meme uses an image of SpongeBob taken directly from the episode Little Yellow Book, showing him in a strange, exaggerated pose with an oddly shaped mouth. This specific image became widely used across the internet as a way of mocking or making fun of something someone else has said, often paired with a sentence written using alternating uppercase and lowercase letters to visually represent a mocking, sarcastic tone of voice. This detail about alternating capital letters deserves its own attention because it represents something larger than just one single meme format. According to reporting on the show's overall influence on internet culture, the specific style of writing, where letters switch back and forth between uppercase and lowercase, used specifically to represent sarcasm in text form, traces directly back to this same SpongeBob meme. This means a writing style now used constantly across nearly every corner of the internet, in comment sections, text messages, and social media posts everywhere, originated directly from one single image taken from one specific episode episode of this show. Another widely recognized example is generally referred to as the tired SpongeBob meme, taken directly from the episode Nature Pants. This particular image shows SpongeBob appearing visibly exhausted, and it became widely used across the internet, specifically as a way of expressing feelings of tiredness, exhaustion, or general burnout, regardless of what specific situation or conversation the meme was actually being used in. A third major example involves Squidward rather than SpongeBob directly. Taken from the episode Squid's Day Off, an image capturing Squidward looking visibly disheveled and worn down became widely used across the internet as a way of representing a similar feeling of exhaustion, stress, or a general sense of things falling apart, often used humorously to describe someone's rough day or overwhelming situation. These three examples represent only a small sample of the much larger total number of memes connected to the show overall, but they help demonstrate exactly how specific and traceable this connection between individual episodes and modern internet culture actually is. These are not vague, general references to the show as a whole. Each of these examples can be traced back to one specific episode, one specific scene, and often one specific individual frame taken directly from that scene. Beyond internet meme culture specifically, the show's influence also extended into another major area of popular culture that might initially seem completely unrelated: music, specifically hip-hop. According to reporting from Genius, a website specifically focused on documenting and analyzing song lyrics, SpongeBob SquarePants has been referenced across hundreds of different hip-hop songs. This includes early references, such as a mention in D12's 2004 song Keep Talkin', stretching all the way through numerous artists across many years since then. According to this same reporting, SpongeBob himself has been mentioned by name more than 100 times across songs recorded by a wide range of different artists, including well-known names such as Wu-Tang Clan and Smoke Perp. This level of repeated reference across the work of so many different artists, spanning such a long stretch of time, shows that the show's influence extended well beyond casual internet jokes, and firmly embedded itself into mainstream music culture as well. One artist specifically interviewed about this connection, a Los Angeles-based hip-hop artist named Chewy, who collaborated on a song specifically about the show, titled Bikini Bottom, explained part of the reasoning behind this cultural connection. He described how, growing up, wearing SpongeBob-branded clothing, including sneakers and backpacks featuring the character, was a common and recognizable part of everyday fashion within certain communities. According to Chewy, once artists from the Bay Area and other prominent figures within hip-hop culture began wearing SpongeBob-branded clothing publicly, especially in music videos, it helped establish the character as a widely accepted and recognized part of broader hip-hop culture and fashion. This detail reveals something important about how SpongeBob's cultural influence spread. It did not stay contained purely within children's entertainment, nor did it remain limited only to internet meme culture. It moved fluidly across multiple, completely different cultural spaces, from children's television into internet humor, and eventually into fashion and mainstream music, carried forward specifically by the same generation that had grown up watching the show as children. The show's connection to internet culture continued evolving well beyond its earliest meme era as well. In 2019, Nickelodeon officially released a line of toys, specifically inspired by popular SpongeBob internet memes, taking imagery that had originally spread organically across the internet and turning it into official, licensed merchandise. This detail is particularly interesting because it shows the show's official creators and distributors directly acknowledging and embracing meme culture, rather than simply allowing it to exist separately online without any official recognition. The studio has since continued including direct references to well-known internet memes inside official SpongeBob video games as well, further blending the line between fan-created internet content and officially produced show material. According to Matt Shimkowitz, a senior editor at Know Your Meme who spoke with Time magazine about this exact topic, several combined factors help explain why SpongeBob memes specifically became so widely popular and enduring. He pointed toward nostalgia connected to the show's original young audience, combined with the simple fact that the show's characters and expressions are particularly effective at representing complex emotions using using a single, simple image. Separately, Michael Gold, writing for the New York Times, offered another explanation tied directly to the sheer scale of the show's production. Because the show has produced such an enormous number of total episodes, and because it was already so widely watched and culturally present, specifically during the early years of the 21st century, exactly when internet culture itself was beginning to take shape, it naturally became, according to Gold's phrasing, extremely easy material for meme creators to work with. Taken together, all of these separate pieces of evidence point toward the same overall conclusion. SpongeBob SquarePants did not deliberately set out to become the internet's single most dominant source of meme content. Nobody involved in writing or animating the show's earliest seasons could have possibly predicted the existence of memes, social media platforms, or modern internet culture as it exists today. Instead, a specific combination of factors, a comedic style built around expressive, exaggerated imagery, a massive existing episode library, an enormous and deeply familiar built-in audience, and extremely fortunate timing that placed its most devoted young viewers directly at the center of early internet culture's formation, combined together almost accidentally to create one of the single most meme-heavy pieces of media in the entire history of the internet. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. This accidental, almost coincidental relationship between a children's cartoon and the future of internet humor stands in sharp contrast to something else entirely, something involving the actual man who created the show in the first place. While SpongeBob SquarePants grew into a massive, sprawling cultural phenomenon, spreading across memes, music, fashion, merchandise, and nearly every corner of modern entertainment, the person responsible for originally creating it held a very different, and at times surprisingly uneasy, relationship with exactly how big and how commercialized his creation eventually became. Section 10. The creator who was uneasy with what he built. Every fact covered so far in this video points toward the same overall picture. A show built from real marine biology, named after a real and heavy piece of history, filled with characters modeled on real animals, celebrated with real awards, recognized by real scientists, and woven permanently into real internet culture. By almost any measurement available, SpongeBob SquarePants became one of the largest entertainment successes in modern television history. Given all of this, it would be reasonable to assume that Steven Hillenburg, the man responsible for creating this entire world, spent his final years feeling nothing but pride and comfort watching his creation grow larger and larger with each passing year. The full picture is more complicated than that. Hillenburg's actual relationship with the show's massive success appears to have carried real tension alongside the pride. Tension rooted specifically in who he was before any of this fame ever began. Remember that Hillenburg did not start his career hoping to build a global entertainment brand. He started as a marine biology teacher, someone who spent years standing directly in tide pools, teaching children to appreciate ocean ecosystems for their own sake, not as a business opportunity. This background shaped a set of values that stayed with him long after SpongeBob SquarePants became one of the most successful shows on television. One of the clearest examples of this tension involves a private fear Hillenburg reportedly shared with people close to him. According to an account shared by Sherm Cohen, someone who worked directly with Hillenburg and discussed this in an interview, Hillenburg once expressed a very specific and very personal worry. He said his biggest nightmare involved being at the beach one day and seeing one of the countless SpongeBob dolls that had been manufactured over the years washed up on the shore, sitting there like ordinary garbage. According to Cohen's explanation of this comment, this fear made complete sense once you understood who Hillenburg actually was underneath his role as a famous show creator. Cohen specifically pointed out that Hillenburg was a marine biologist who also surfed regularly, someone who spent real time in and around the ocean throughout his entire life. Given this background, the idea of contributing, even indirectly, to plastic waste and garbage ending up in the exact ocean environments he had spent his career studying and protecting was genuinely troubling to him. This detail reveals an uncomfortable irony sitting at the center of Hillenburg's entire career. His show, built specifically to help children fall in love with ocean life, eventually generated such a massive amount of merchandise, much of it plastic toys and products manufactured and sold around the the world that Hillenburg himself worried some of that same merchandise might eventually end up polluting the very oceans his show was meant to help protect in the first place. This tension between commercial success and personal values shows up in other comments Hillenburg made as well. According to another account describing conversations with Hillenburg, he specifically worried about what he described as excessive merchandising connected to the show, along with the broader environmental consequences that this level of merchandising could potentially create for the planet. This worry was not simply theoretical or vague. It connected to something Hillenburg said directly regarding potential future spin-offs of the franchise. According to an account shared by Paul Tibbett, someone who worked closely with Hillenburg on the show, Hillenburg once told him that eventually people were going to want to create something like a SpongeBob Babies spin-off, taking the established characters and turning them into a younger, more toy-friendly version aimed even more directly at very young children and merchandise sales. According to Tibbett's account, Hillenburg specifically said that once that day arrived, that would be the moment he stepped away from the franchise entirely. This comment reveals something important about where Hillenburg personally drew the line regarding how far he was willing to let the show's commercial expansion go. He was not opposed to the show's popularity itself, and he clearly participated actively in its growth for many years. But he appeared to have a very specific point in mind, a version of commercialization so purely focused on selling merchandise to young children that it would cross a line he was not personally willing to accept being associated with. Hillenburg's uneasy relationship with his own fame extended beyond just merchandising concerns. According to another account describing his personal behavior, Hillenburg was reportedly uncomfortable in certain situations, where his identity as the creator of SpongeBob SquarePants became the center of attention. In one specific example described in a New York Times interview, Hillenburg reacted with visible discomfort after one of his old classmates introduced him publicly as the creator of SpongeBob, seemingly because of how he felt about the show's overwhelming, almost inescapable level of popularity by that point. This detail suggests that Hillenburg's discomfort was not purely about environmental concerns or merchandising specifically. It also touched on a more personal, more complicated relationship with fame itself, a sense of unease about being defined so completely and so publicly by a single creation, regardless of how successful or beloved that creation had become around the world. Despite these tensions, Hillenburg did not walk away from the show entirely. His level of direct, hands-on involvement did shift significantly over time, however, particularly following one major turning point in the franchise's history. In 2004, the SpongeBob SquarePants movie was released in theaters, marking the franchise's first major expansion beyond the original television series. Hillenburg was intensely involved in this project, working closely across nearly every part of its production. Once this film was completed, Hillenburg made a deliberate decision to step back from his previous role as the show's primary showrunner, moving instead into a position as executive producer, a role he remained in for the rest of his life. This transition matters because it shows that Hillenburg's relationship with the show evolved deliberately over time, rather than remaining fixed in exactly the same intense, hands-on involvement he had maintained during the show's earliest seasons. He remained connected to the franchise, and he remained credited and involved as an executive producer, but he intentionally created some distance between himself and the daily creative decisions being made about the show going forward. Even while stepping back from direct daily involvement, Hillenburg remained connected to major creative projects tied to the franchise. In 2017, when the SpongeBob musical debuted on Broadway, earning 12 Tony Award nominations, actor Ethan Slater, who portrayed SpongeBob on stage, spoke warmly about his personal experience meeting and working near Hillenburg during this project. Slater described Hillenburg not simply as a talented creative figure, but specifically as someone who treated the Broadway cast and crew with genuine kindness, warmly welcoming them as new members of what Slater described as the larger SpongeBob family. This account offers an important balance to the earlier examples describing Hillenburg's discomfort with fame and merchandising. It shows that his uneasy feelings about certain aspects of the franchise's massive commercial growth did not translate into general bitterness or coldness toward the people working alongside him on creative projects tied to his original vision. He remained warm, kind, and genuinely supportive toward people directly involved in expanding the show into new creative territory, even while privately holding real concerns about other aspects of how large and how commercialized the overall franchise had become. Hillenburg's health took a serious turn in March 2017 when he publicly announced that he had been diagnosed with amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, more commonly known as ALS, a serious and progressive disease affecting the nervous system. Despite this diagnosis, Hillenburg continued to remain connected to his work and his creative legacy for as long as he was able to. Steven Hillenburg passed away on November 26, 2018, at the age of 57. His death was publicly announced by Nickelodeon, and it generated an enormous outpouring of tributes from people across the entertainment industry, many of whom specifically emphasized not just his creative talent, but his genuine kindness and generosity as a person, echoing the same sentiment Ethan Slater had expressed about him regarding the Broadway production. Even after his passing, the tension between Hillenburg's personal values and the franchise's ongoing commercial expansion continued to surface publicly on multiple occasions. In 2022, a non-profit fan-created project titled The SpongeBob SquarePants Movie Rehydrated was released online. This project involved a large volunteer effort with roughly 300 people working together to recreate the original 2004 movie using new animation, along with newly recorded music and dialogue. This project was created specifically in honor of Hillenburg, reflecting the deep personal connection many fans felt toward both the original film and its creator. Shortly after this fan-made tribute premiered on YouTube, it was taken down due to a copyright claim filed by Paramount Global, the company holding official rights to the SpongeBob franchise. This action from Paramount led to significant public backlash, with the hashtag #JusticeForSpongeBob trending on social media as fans expressed frustration over the removal of a project made purely as a tribute without any commercial motive behind it. Following this backlash, the video was restored the following day, allowing the tribute project to remain available online. This entire situation reflects an interesting continuation of the same underlying tension present throughout much of Hillenburg's own relationship with the franchise. A passionate, sincere creative tribute made purely out of love for his original work ran directly into the much larger, more commercially focused corporate structure that had grown up around the franchise since his passing. A structure primarily concerned with protecting commercial rights and licensing, rather than necessarily prioritizing the kind of grassroots creative passion the project itself represented. A separate and even more direct example of this same tension emerged in 2024 when Nickelodeon partnered with the fast food chain Wendy's to create a promotional meal called the Krabby Patty Collab. This promotion involved selling a regular Wendy's burger alongside a specially branded sauce, marketed directly using SpongeBob branding tied to the Krusty Krab restaurant featured throughout the show. This particular promotion drew specific criticism from fans, many of whom pointed out that turning SpongeBob's fictional Krabby Patty into an actual real-world fast food product appeared to directly contradict Hillenburg's previously stated wishes regarding how the franchise should be commercially handled. Recall Hillenburg's own comment about drawing a firm line at things like a potential SpongeBob Babies spin-off, and his broader, documented discomfort with excessive merchandising. A real-world fast food tie-in, selling an actual physical version of the show's fictional signature food item, represents exactly the kind of aggressive, character-driven commercial expansion that appears to run directly against the values Hillenburg expressed while he was alive. At the same time, it would be inaccurate to present Hillenburg as someone who rejected commercial success entirely throughout his career. He remained actively involved in major franchise expansions during his lifetime, including feature films and the Broadway musical, and he clearly understood and accepted that a certain level of merchandising and commercial growth came naturally with running a hugely successful television franchise. His concerns appear to have centered on specific lines he personally did not want crossed, rather than opposition to commercial success as a general concept. Even with these documented tensions, Hillenburg's original hopes for what SpongeBob SquarePants could accomplish beyond entertainment continued forward after his passing, in ways that appear to genuinely honor his original values. In 2025, Nickelodeon announced a new initiative called SpongeBob SquarePants Operation Sea Change, described as a global ocean conservation and sustainability initiative connected directly to the franchise. This initiative connects directly back to comments Hillenburg made years earlier when he explained his hope that people watching SpongeBob would come away wanting to help take care of the oceans, having spent time watching the plankton, crabs, and starfish that populate the show's world. An official conservation initiative launched under the SpongeBob name represents exactly the kind of outcome Hillenburg appeared to genuinely hope his creation might eventually help inspire, even decades after the show's original premiere. Taken together, this final piece of Hillenburg's story adds an important layer of depth to everything already covered throughout this entire video. The man who built Bikini Bottom using real marine biology, who named its town after a real and painful piece of nuclear history, who modeled every major character after real animal behavior, and who eventually watched his creation become one of the most successful and culturally significant television shows ever produced. Never fully stopped being the person he was before any of that success arrived. He remained, underneath all of it, someone who genuinely cared about the ocean, someone uncomfortable with certain forms of commercial excess, and someone who hoped, even as his creation grew into a massive global entertainment brand, that people watching it might still walk away caring just a little more about the real, living world his cartoon had always been quietly built from in the first place. Every piece of this story, from a marine biology classroom in California, to a nuclear test site in the middle of the Pacific, to real creatures found on the ocean floor, to a fungus growing in a rainforest in Borneo, to record-breaking award counts, to an entire generation shaping internet culture around a single show, eventually leads back to this same quiet truth sitting underneath everything else. Bikini Bottom was never simply a funny, colorful place invented purely to entertain. It was always, from its very first sketch inside a teaching comic decades ago, an attempt by one specific person to help others see the ocean the same way he did. And somewhere in the middle of building one of the most successful entertainment franchises in modern history, that original purpose never fully disappeared.
If you enjoyed this video essay, make sure to subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.